Chapter 70. Qin Huayong came quickly and went up the mountain before noon. He came to see old grandma first, and old grandma sent everyone out of the room. Nanny Duan knew that the mother and son had something to say, so she deliberately waited outside the door. Huayong, what are you going to do about it? Old grandma sat on the bed and asked with a gloomy face. Mother, I can't divorce Madame D now. There were only the mother and son in the room, so Qin Huayong didn't need to hide something. He said with a wry smile, Duke Yong's mansion was benevolent and righteous at that time. Even though I was not prominent at that time, they still married their daughter. I can't be ungrateful. Qin Huayong said with a tired look. I won't force you to do this. Before Qin Huayong came, Madame Dowager had made it clear that it was impossible to divorce Madame D at this time. Not to mention that Duke Yong's mansion had always flaunted the idea of Madame D marrying a man of a lower status. It was impossible for such a thing to happen when Qin Huayong was transferred back to the capital city. Ningyuan Army General's mansion was one of the best in Jiangzhou, but it was nothing in the capital city. Moreover, there was still Qin Yuru. With Qin Huayong's temperament, it was impossible for him to abandon his only daughter. Marry Rulin and let her be your legal wife. Rulin will take care of Zhuozhuo in the future. Madame D and Rulin will be in charge of the backyard together. I'm old and useless, so I can't take care of the backyard for you anymore. Old grandma sighed and leaned back with a gloomy look. Mother, I'll do as you say. You will recover. Seeing old grandma's look, Qin Huayong felt a pain in his heart and was very sad. It won't take long for the whole Jiangzhou prefecture to know that Madame D framed up Zhuozhuo today. They will also know that Madame D framed up Rulin. They will also know that you married Rulin at this time to give Rulin an explanation. On the other hand, Zhuozhuo will have no mother to take care of her. From now on, Zhuozhuo will be raised by Rulin. With what happened today, no one will gossip about you in the officialdom. Old grandma continued. Originally, I thought that this was not the time for Rulin to enter the door, but now, I have no choice but to do so. What she said was very logical, and every word was said with consideration for Qin Huayong. Qin Huayong suddenly felt ashamed. He was indeed grateful for what had happened in the past, but there were some things that he did have selfish motives for. Madame Dowager didn't expose him, but she kept thinking for his sake. How could she not feel ashamed? Mother, there shouldn't be any problem with Madame D, right? Old grandma shook her hand and sighed lightly. She looked at Qin Huayong and asked gently. Qin Huayong sneered angrily. How dare she say such a thing? She even wanted to kidnap Wanru. Wanru is such a well-behaved child, and we have raised her for so many years. How could she do it? Qin Huayong sneered angrily. Seeing the coachman was sent to him, and then seeing Madame D hurrying over with a flustered look, Qin Huayong immediately understood and immediately ordered someone to interrogate the coachman. He was a general, and the army had a set of torture methods to deal with spies. The coachman couldn't stand it and told everything. He gave Madame D 2 hard slaps on the face at that time, and then brought his men to Jingshin Monastery. At this time, as long as he didn't divorce Madame D, she had no right to say anything. Even if Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city knew it, they had no reason to interfere in this matter. Madame D and Duke Yong's mansion were in the hands of this matter. Since this matter has been decided, you go back to the mansion to prepare. I will go down the mountain 5 days later and arrange this marriage for you. Let Madame D do a good job in the mansion. Madame Dowager nodded, thought for a while and said, I have a manor at the foot of the mountain in Jingshin Monastery. Let Rulin live there first, and you can go there to escort the bride. That manor was actually not very close to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. To escort the bride from here, at least half of Jiangzhou city had to go around Jingshin Monastery. This was also Madame Dowager's intention to make face for Shui Rulin, and also to let more people know that this marriage was legitimate, so that there wouldn't be more gossip about this marriage in the future. I understand. Qin Huayong agreed one by one. What about Yuru? There were a lot of womenfolk present at that time, and then there will be more rumors. Madame Dowager sighed. After all, Qin Yuru was her granddaughter, and she was actually worried about her. Let Yuru go to the capital city and temporarily live in Duke Yang's mansion. Jiangzhou, she can't stay here any longer. Her marriage can wait until I go to the capital city. Qin Huayong had a headache and pressed his temples. He was increasingly dissatisfied with Madame D. If Madame D didn't teach her well, how could such a thing happen? His good daughter was almost ruined, and her reputation in Jiangzhou was ruined. He hoped that when she went to the capital city in the future, no one would mention this matter again. Since the heir of Duke Yong wanted to marry Qin Yuru, then this matter should be settled. Therefore, this time Qin Yuru went to the capital city with the reason of going to the capital city to get engaged. That's the only way. Madame Dowager nodded, and then asked with concern, how about your transfer order? Mother, don't worry. There is some progress. Someone from Duke Yong's mansion came to talk about this matter, and there is also news from other sources. Qin Huayong said vaguely. In fact, there was news about the mysterious Prince Chen who came to Jiangzhou, but this was a secret. Even in front of Madame Dowager, Qin Huayong didn't dare to say more. But he believed that even if he didn't say it, Madame Dowager could guess a little. Mother, today Madame D's people made a mistake. Where is the madam in the courtyard now? Such a thing happened in Jiangzhou. I will go to meet that madam. After Madame Dowager's matter was settled, Qin Huayong stood up. The reason why he came in a hurry was also an important reason. Is she from a powerful background? Madame Dowager frowned and asked in a low voice. The daughter of Duke Yangxiu's young madam and Duke Yangxiu's young madam in the capital city. Qin Huayong rubbed between his eyebrows. This matter was actually not easy to deal with. Since he saw the name card of Duke Yangxiu's young madam, Qin Huayong knew that he had to give an explanation for this matter. It's actually Duke Yangxiu's young madam. Madame Dowager was shocked, and her face changed slightly. In the military, Duke Yangxiu's young madam's maiden family was considered a powerful one. What a coincidence! What is she doing in Jiangzhou instead of the capital city? I don't know. Maybe she is visiting relatives. Qin Huayong said. Then you go first, Madame Dowager said. Madame Dowager said. After thinking for a while, she reminded Qin Huayong, who was about to go out, this Duke Yangxiu's young madam seems to like Zhuozhuo very much. Thank you, mother. I know what to do. Qin Huayong's feet paused on the threshold for a moment, then he nodded and said. Coming out of Madame Dowager's yard, Nanny Duan personally led Qin Huayong to the yard of Duke Yangxiu's young madam. After the servant reported, Qin Huayong was invited into the house. After the two greeted each other, they went to the house separately. General Qin, how should we deal with this matter? Madame Xian was a straightforward person. She didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Madam, this matter is also considered as my family's matter. Fortunately, you and your daughter are in danger. Otherwise, I can't absolve myself from the guilt. Qin Huayong stood up and saluted again with his hands folded. I will give you a generous gift to apologize later. General is too polite. It doesn't matter whether the gift is polite or not. It's just that the young daughter of General's mansion is innocent. It's really pitiful. Madame Xian had already guessed what Qin Huayong would do. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, then said with a faint smile. Qin Huayong was silent for a while. After sitting down again, he asked, Madam, what do you mean? I don't mean much. After all, she is just an outsider. But as a mother whose daughter was almost killed, I really can't see this child being so pitiful. Find her a mother who loves her. Madame Xian turned her eyes to Qin Huayong with a bit of fierceness. Qin Huayong's face darkened. Madame Xian, are you going to interfere in my family's affairs? Madame Dowager said this matter sincerely for him. But Madame Xian was an outsider. Moreover, under such circumstances, she had the intention of forcing him to marry. General Qin, do you think I am forcing you to marry? Madame Xian smiled. What do you mean, madam? Qin Huayong asked. Of course, I feel that the young girl is pitiful. But your cousin is also pitiful. She has been a widow for a long time, but she is also plotted against. If no one helps her, she will be a concubine at most, and a concubine who remarries. How many people will value her? This time was enough for Madame Xian to inquire about Shui Rulan. The cousin is pitiful, and the young girl is pitiful. In this case, why don't you give her a way out? It is also a good thing. I think Miss Shui and second Miss Qin are both good people. If the general takes pity on them, you will be rewarded in the future. After saying this, Qin Huayong was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed, stood up and bowed to Madame Xian. I thank you on behalf of them. No need to thank me. I just saw an injustice on the road. Madame Xian also stood up and bowed to him politely. Now everyone had a tacit understanding about this matter. Although Madame Xian was straightforward, she was a woman after all. Qin Huayong couldn't stay for long. After saying goodbye, he went to Qin Wanru's yard opposite. Qin Wanru had already been waiting in the yard. Seeing Qin Huayong striding over, she hurriedly stepped forward to salute. Qin Huayong waved his hand and strode into the house. Qin Wanru followed in and wanted to salute again, but she was stopped by him. Wanru, speaking of this matter, your mother was also deceived. The coachman found an excuse to make trouble and made such a thing. Qin Huayong frowned. He wanted to whitewash everything, but he couldn't go on when he saw his little daughter's black eyes. Qin Wanru's eyes were so pure that they could almost reflect people's hearts. Qin Huayong couldn't make up those false words for a while. Originally, he thought that his little daughter was still young. As long as he said some appropriate words, he could hide this matter and maintain the superficial peace. But when he saw his little daughter's clear eyes reflecting his figure, he felt more guilty. Although Qin Wanru was young, she was a smart child. Chapter 71. Thank you, father. Hearing Qin Huayong's words, Qin Wanru bowed to him. Her watery eyes were curved, and she smiled like a flower. It could be seen that she was very happy. This child was really kind. He didn't mention anything that would make her feel awkward, but he still smiled so sincerely. In the future, Wanru would be raised by Rulan. Qin Huayong knew Rulan's character, and she would never mistreat Wanru. Qin Huayong didn't stay on the mountain for long. After comforting Qin Wanru, he went down the mountain. Madame Xian and Luo Shaowan also left after lunch that day. Qin Wanru sent them to the foot of the mountain. Luo Shaowan and Qin Wanru whispered a lot before reluctantly leaving with Madame Xian. Miss, let's go back. Qin Yu looked at the forest behind the mountain and reminded Qin Wanru. Last night, something happened to Qin Yuru here. Although it was daytime, Qin Yu still felt scared. Nothing will happen here. Qin Wanru shook her head. Mrs. Xian and others went down from the back mountain. She looked around and pointed to a path. Let's go further. Miss, where does this path lead to? Qin Yu looked at the path on the right and said uneasily. She was not familiar with this place, and she was afraid that there would be an accident. She was now very vigilant because of Madame D. I don't know. Let's go and see. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on a few orchids on the side of the path. There were only 2 or 3 of them, and they weren't even exquisite ones. They were just the most ordinary kind, as if they were randomly growing on the roadside. They had small yellow flowers, and they weren't big, but they were very exquisite upon closer inspection. The gravel path, coupled with these few clusters of orchids, was not eye-catching, but inexplicably exquisite. There was a gravel path in front of Qin Wanru's feet, which was where Madame Xian and Luo Shaowan went down. It was a path to the foot of the mountain. Where did this path lead to? It was almost impossible that two similar paths led to the foot of the mountain. Moreover, both paths were paved with gravel, so Jingshin Monastery would not do something superfluous. Let's go and have a look. Qin Wanru thought of something and turned around. Miss, let's not go. Qin Yu was very worried. Although she was walking behind Qin Wanru, she was still worried. I'm fine. Qin Wanru shook her head, stood still, looked around, and then walked again. She suddenly had a guess in her mind, but she didn't know whether it was true or not. She would go to find out now. Seeing that she insisted, Qin Yu could only follow behind her and walk in carefully. After a few steps, there was a bend. There were also a few orchids by the side of the road. They were blooming with small flowers and had an enchanting posture. Although they were ordinary, they exuded the elegance of autumn. The path took a few more turns, sometimes going up and sometimes going down. When Qin Wanru stood still and took a rest, she looked back and found that the path was generally going up. From a distance, she could see a flat grassland in front of her. There were 3 thatched cottages built on the grassland, and a few tall bamboos stood behind the cottages. Unlike ordinary green bamboos, it was actually purple bamboos. His lips curled into a smile. It seemed like he had really found it. As she walked closer, she found that the cottage was closed, the door was locked, and the window was closed tightly. Turning to the back of the cottage, she saw a few purple bamboos, a cluster of orchids, and a very quiet place. Looking up, it seemed to be a little bit below the side of the peak of Jingshin Monastery, but not the back of Jingshin Monastery. From this position, she could see several Buddhist halls on the top of Jingshin Monastery. The incense smoke was curling up, and the sound of Zen was deep and distant, but she would not be disturbed by other people. It was a good place to meditate and practice Zen. Miss, there is no one here. After Qin Yu walked around the house for 3 times, she found nothing. It should be an abandoned house, and it seems that no one has lived in it for a long time. Someone lives in it. Qin Wanru shook her head, and her eyes fell on a bamboo hat hanging outside the door. The bamboo hat was not big, and it was still wet, and had not dried. Looking at the autumn sun in the middle of the sky, under this kind of sun, if it was not kept for a long time, the water on the bamboo hat should have dried long ago. Following Qin Wanru's eyes, Qin Yu also saw the wet bamboo hat, and couldn't help but touch it, and her face was full of surprise. Miss, it is really wet, this, who lives in it? Who would choose to live here instead of in Jingshin Monastery? Is it a male pilgrim? No. Qin Wanru shook her head. Jingshin Monastery never allowed male pilgrims to live in the monastery, even her father could not break this rule, and everyone in Jiangzhou knew it. If it was really possible to let male pilgrims live here, and it was on such an easy way to find, it was impossible that there were no rumors. Female pilgrims have a place to live on the top, but male pilgrims are not allowed to live here. Besides male and female pilgrims, who else would live here? Qin Yu said confusedly, and raised her head to look around. Miss, this place is really good to live in, it is very quiet, and the scenery is good. You can see the monastery on the mountain, and enjoy the scenery around. Qin Wanru slightly raised her lips. Must it be a pilgrim? If not a pilgrim, who would live on the mountain? Qin Yu said subconsciously. Qin Wanru smiled and pointed to the top of her head, but didn't say anything, and tilted her head, looking at the hut, and thinking. Qin Yu also looked up, following Qin Wanru's finger, and there was nothing on the top, except the sky and the Buddha hall. Miss, there is only a monastery on the top. Are they nuns in the monastery? Qin Yu didn't see anything, and subconsciously curled her lips, and suddenly jumped up in surprise. Ah, miss, they are nuns in Jingshin Monastery, right? Qin Wanru walked around the house, and there was nothing around, so she focused on the empty grassland, walked a few steps, squatted down, and focused on a few clovers that looked the same. The clovers had 3 leaves, and looked very ordinary. If Qin Wanru didn't read medical books, she would think so, but now she could see that these clovers were herbs. She looked up at other places around, and it was not a grassland, but a grass garden with many herbs planted in between. She slightly raised her eyes, and the smile on her face became more obvious. Let's go back first. Qin Wanru stood up, and looked at the front of the hut, and said after a few more glances. Yes, miss. Qin Yu looked at Qin Wanru eagerly. Miss seemed to have a well-thought-out plan, but she didn't know anything. The path that they took out seemed to be faster than before. Qin Wanru walked on the path into the woods, and after the woods, they would arrive at Jingshin Monastery. After finding the position, Qin Wanru saw the Buddha hall in the hut below, and the meditation room of the master of Jingshin Monastery beside the Buddha hall. The meditation room of the master of Jingshin Monastery was not in the center of Jingshin Monastery, but in a remote place. Standing outside the meditation room of the master of Jingshin Monastery, Qin Wanru hesitated, but still walked in. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, the nun guarding the door bowed to her, and then went into the room to report to the master of Jingshin Monastery. After a while, the nun came out. Second Miss Qin, our master wants to see you. Qin Wanru smiled politely, asked Qin Yu to stay at the door, and walked into the room alone. In the meditation room, the fragrance was curling up from the incense burner on the table. The fragrance of the Buddhist incense was different from other incense, and it had a feeling of calming the mind. Just stepping in, she already felt much more refreshed. The master of Jingshin Monastery knelt in front of her rush cushion, and it seemed that she was not surprised that Qin Wanru would appear at this time. Master, can I ask about Mingqiu Nun? Qin Wanru went forward and knelt down in front of another rush cushion, bowed to the master, and asked. Junior sister is not in the monastery. The master of Jingshin Monastery smiled gently. Master, can I ask if Mingqiu Nun is still in Jiangzhou? Qin Wanru asked. Maybe she is, or maybe not. After junior sister left Jingshin Monastery, she might not tell me her whereabouts. The master of Jingshin Monastery smiled slightly, and her eyes fell on Qin Wanru, which seemed to have a deep meaning. Master of Jingshin Monastery, do you think I can find Mingqiu Nun? Qin Wanru changed her way of asking. Well, it depends on fate. The rise and fall of fate, in fact, sometimes it is very simple, but sometimes it is as difficult as climbing up to heaven. The words of the master of Jingshin Monastery became more and more enlightened. Qin Wanru's curiosity seemed to be aroused. Her long and curly eyelashes fluttered twice. She raised her big black eyes and looked at the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery. I wonder if you could help me pass a message to Mingqiu Nun. What message? I want to ask Mingqiu Nun to teach me medical skills. Qin Wanru straightened her body, and the smile on her face faded, and her little face became taut and serious. It depends on fate. The master of Jingshin Monastery looked at Qin Wanru with a smile and said leisurely, and then reached out to pick up the 3 sticks of incense, handed them to Qin Wanru, and pointed to the incense burner at the corner of the table by the window. Go and burn some incense, and see if you have the fate. Qin Wanru stood up and took it respectfully. She walked to the incense table, lit the 3 incense sticks, and inserted them into the incense burner. Her eyes involuntarily fell on an open book on the table. It was a medical book, which was different from the one she had read before. After her rebirth, Qin Wanru had read that medical book for a long time and was very familiar with it. She basically remembered it, so she could tell that this book was different at a glance. But the binding of this book was very similar to the one in his hand, and in several places it was exactly the same. This is the next dungeon. Qin Wanru turned back to look at the master of Jingshin Monastery and asked. Although her previous medical book did not mention the first part, the page that she turned to was obviously more detailed than the one she had. Moreover, Qin Wanru had never heard of the herbs that were accompanied by pictures and pictures on the page. Compared to the book in his hand, this medical book was a little more profound. The master of Jingshin Monastery looked at Qin Wanru quietly, and suddenly laughed happily after a while. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru kindly. That medical book, have you read it? Qin Wanru returned to the rush cushion and sat down. She sat up straight respectfully and said, I have read it carefully. What do you think? The master of Jingshin Monastery asked with a smile. I really want to learn medicine. Qin Wanru stretched out her hands on the ground, and respectfully expressed her intention to the master of Jingshin Monastery. She came today for this, and she was determined. Chapter 72. Since you want to learn medicine very much, then show some sincerity, said the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery. After finishing her words, she curled up the corner of her mouth and glanced at Qin Wanru meaningfully. Then she slowly closed her eyes, pinched the Buddha beads in her hand and began to recite the scripture. It seemed that she didn't want to talk more with Qin Wanru. A nun came in and put her hands together in front of Qin Wanru respectfully. Second Miss Qin, please. Looking at the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery who seemed to be meditating, Qin Wanru reluctantly said goodbye. Out of the door, Qin Yu hurried to catch up with her and said worriedly, Miss, why are you looking for the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery? Nothing. Qin Wanru stood at the door and shook her head, but she didn't leave. She looked down and faintly saw a grassland. If she walked a few steps further, she should be able to see the corner of the hut. Qin Yu also saw it. When she was about to say something, she was stopped by Qin Wanru with a smile. Qin Wanru turned around and walked out. Her watery eyes slightly narrowed. Did the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery want to see her sincerity? The medical book on the desk. Her medical book. 2 medical books that were obviously a set. What did this mean? Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind. The medical book on the desk should be the key. After she asked about the next book, obviously the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery became more and more friendly. Did this mean that she approved of her? It was not enough to only have the approval of the Reverend of Jingshin Monastery. If she wanted to be apprenticed to Mingqiu Nun who had better medical skills, she still needed to get the approval of Mingqiu Nun. On the way back to the fragrant room, Qin Wanru had been thinking about this problem. When she sat down, she frowned. She suddenly remembered that the medical book was taken away by Chu Luqian. Where was the elusive Chu Luqian? It was easy for him to find her, but it was not easy for her to find him. How could she find Chu Luqian? This was the most important problem now. Was he still in her mansion? Qin Wanru couldn't be sure. After thinking for a while, he decided to talk to his grandmother. If there was anyone else in the mansion who might know about Chu Luqian, Madame Dowager was the most likely one. When Qin Wanru arrived, Madame Dowager's medicine was ready. Taking the medicine from the little servant girl, Qin Wanru sat on the stool in front of the bed, blew on the medicine liquid, and carefully fed the medicine to Madame Dowager. After that, the servant girl took the medicine bowl, and Qin Wanru picked up a handkerchief on the side to gently wipe Madame Dowager's lips. Grandmother, why isn't Aunt Shui here? Putting down the handkerchief, Qin Wanru looked around curiously and asked. Shui Rulan was usually here at this time. I asked her to go down the mountain to prepare. Madame Dowager said with a smile. She seemed to be in a good mood, and her voice was not as hoarse as before. Going down the mountain now? Qin Wanru asked casually, and suddenly her eyes lit up. She took Madame Dowager's hand and said happily, Is Aunt Shui going to marry into the mansion? Yes, your father has agreed. Just in a few days. Anyway, I have nothing to do here, and Zhuozhua is with me, so I asked her to prepare. After all, it's a legal marriage. Although it's a little rushed, the etiquette can't be ignored. I'm afraid that your Aunt Shui is not sensible, so I asked Nanny Duan to go down the mountain. Madame Dowager smiled, reached out to touch Qin Wanru's hand, and said kindly, From now on, you will follow Aunt Shui, and let your Aunt Shui protect you. Originally, I could also protect you, but I'm old, and I'm afraid that your future marriage will also be controlled by others, and you will suffer for the rest of your life. I dare not be careless. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly, hiding the coldness in her eyes. In the last life, her marriage was controlled by Madame D, and because of the past events in Jiangzhou, her marriage was full of twists and turns. Engagement, annulment, annulment again, annulment again, annulment again, annulment again, annulment again, annulment again. After 3 annulments, even a woman with a good reputation would have her reputation completely collapsed, not to mention that her reputation was ruined from the root. Madame D controlled her marriage with the identity of her mother, and in the end, no one married her, and she was hastily brought into the Deputy Prime Minister's mansion in the name of marriage. Grandma, this time we have Aunt Shui. Don't worry, with Aunt Shui and me, we will be filial to you, and you will definitely live a long life. When she looked up again, Qin Wanru was already smiling, and reached out to hold Madame Dowager, with a face full of admiration, which made Madame Dowager's eyes bitter. This child was so sensible, how could Madame D do such a vicious thing to her? Grandma, are we going back to the capital? Qin Wanru's thick and long eyelashes fluttered twice, and asked with a smile. Zhuozhua is so smart, it should be soon, your father's transfer order should come. Madame Dowager nodded, and a smile appeared on her face again. At least now it was not too bad, and she was relieved to let Rulin raise Zhuozhua. Rulin was a co-wife, although a little lower than Madame D, at least she was a legitimate wife, and it was possible for her to protect Zhuozhua. Someone from the capital came to send the news. Qin Wanru shook Madame Dowager's hand, and asked coquettishly, and her big black eyes made Madame Dowager feel sad. Zhuozhua, don't worry, it should be true. Madame Dowager thought that Qin Wanru did not want to stay in Jiangzhou, because so many things had happened, so she comforted her. Grandma, why are you so sure that someone from the capital came? Someone came. Qin Wanru blinked her eyes cheerfully and said. Yes. Madame Dowager laughed, and reached out to touch her head. Even if she was not her own granddaughter, Madame Dowager also felt that she loved her to the bone. This child was beautiful and cute, and usually a little naughty, but she had a sense of propriety, and never had any bad intentions. Who is it? Grandma, tell me, who sent the news? Duke Yong's mansion. Qin Wanru said coquettishly. Seeing that she was young and ignorant, Madame Dowager smiled casually and said, not only Duke Yong's mansion, but also another powerful noble in the capital came to send the news. Because of Madame D, Madame Dowager did not have a good impression of Duke Yong's mansion. Someone from the capital came to the capital. Is he living in our mansion? However, Qin Wanru looked curious today, and it seemed that she wanted to get to the bottom of it, but this was completely like a child's innocent questioning. He lived in the mansion for a period of time, and now he left. Of course, Madame Dowager could not tell such an important thing to a child, so she just said vaguely. Qin Wanru's heart beat fiercely, and her face turned pale. Did he really leave at this critical time? Where did he go, Grandma? Did the person from the capital go back? Qin Wanru blinked her eyes, and her long eyelashes almost brushed Madame Dowager's palm. He didn't go back, I heard that he is in the farm, but I don't know the details. This is your father's business. You are just a little girl, how can you ask so many questions? Madame Dowager reached out to touch her forehead gently, and scolded her with a smile. Madame Dowager knew a little because Qin Huayong accidentally revealed some information, but Madame Dowager actually did not know the real identity of Chu Luqian. Although Madame Dowager's words were scolding, her voice and movement were very gentle, and had no effect on Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru acted like a spoiled child, and talked with Madame Dowager for a while. Seeing that Madame Dowager looked a little tired, Qin Wanru left. She walked outside, and then ordered a few servant girls and old maids to serve Madame Dowager in a low voice, and then left. Chu Luqian came to her room last night, and left early this morning. Was the so-called farm near Jingxin Monastery? She suddenly remembered that her father had a farm in this area. In the past, when she accompanied her grandma to Jingxin Monastery to recuperate, her father would spend the night in a nearby farm. Qingyu, do you know where my father spent the night when he came to Jingxin Monastery late in the past? Qin Wanru thought for a while and asked. There was one time when her father left late, and Qin Yu even sent him out of Jingxin Monastery. I know. General is resting in a manor in our mansion. I have asked the manservant beside General and he said that General lives in a manor at the back of the mountain. Qin Yu said as she followed Qin Wanru to go out. Do you know the way? Qin Wanru was relieved, as long as Chu Luchen did not leave. I know a little, but not all. I used to send General to an intersection in the back of the mountain of Jingxin Monastery, and I saw a yard from afar, but I don't know if it is that one. Qin Yu said after thinking carefully. That time, she did not actually send General to the yard, and the General asked her to stop from afar. Go, and have a look. Qin Wanru had made a decision, and turned to the back of the mountain of Jingxin Monastery. Chu Luchen didn't know why he came to Jiangzhou, nor did he know when he would leave. If he really left, where could she find him? That medical book was the key for her to learn medicine, so she couldn't lose it. Yes, miss. I will take a look in front, miss, don't go there. Qin Yu nodded, trotted a few steps to catch up with Qin Wanru, and led the way in front of her. Although she did not know what Qin Wanru was going to do, since miss said so, Qin Yu naturally obeyed. She now had 100% trust in Qin Wanru. The master and servant went to the back of the mountain one after another, and took a detour to a path in Qin Yu's memory. They passed through the woods, and saw a yard in the distance. The yard of the farm was not big, and looked very calm. The wall was not high, and it was not much different from the yard of the incense room in Jingxin Monastery. Qin Wanru walked to the door, and even saw a few sticks of smoked meat hanging under the beam, which was similar to the common families who were going to celebrate the new year. The only thing that was not in harmony with the plain yard was a handsome young man in a red brocade robe. He sat on the only big chair made of nanmu in the yard, rocking the chair with his eyes closed, and looked very relaxed. There was a book in his hand, and the book looked familiar. Qin Wanru recognized it at first glance. It was the medical book that was snatched from her hands. The young man's features were exquisite, and he exuded an air of elegance. However, the bright red brocade robe made people feel that it was inexplicably much richer. This made the handsome young man who walked out of the inkwash landscape seem to exude a nobility that came from his bones. It was a kind of enchanting and elegant nobility, but it was very harmonious, as if he had always been like this. Chapter 73. She was found out. Qin Wanru was not surprised. Although there was no one in the yard, it didn't mean that there was no one around. She came here to find him, and she was relieved to see him still here. He was indeed in the farm near Jingxin Monastery. Child. Qin Wanru walked to Chu Luchen, stopped, and bowed to him respectfully. What's the matter? Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows and opened his eyes. It seemed that he was not surprised that she could find him here, and he turned over the railing of his chair. Xiao Xuanzi came out of nowhere with a small stool in his hand, and he put it in front of Chu Luchen. Chu Luchen raised his eyes and glanced at the stool playfully. Qin Wanru sat down sensibly. She was originally short, and after sitting down, she naturally became shorter. She blinked her eyes and had to raise her head to look up at Chu Luchen. She remembered that when she stood just now, she was looking down at him. Child, I have something. Qin Wanru thought for a while, and thought it was better to come straight to the point. Her words were interrupted by Chu Luchen carelessly. Don't you feel that you have a lot of things to do, and I can't help you all with all of them? Child, it's different this time. Qin Wanru bit her lips, and her eyes fell on the medical book, and she was quite resentful. If he didn't take away her book, she wouldn't have this trouble this time. Do you want this book? Chu Luchen raised his hand and asked when he saw her eager look. Child, this book is mine. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes, looked at Chu Luchen, and stated. So, you plan to? Chu Luchen closed the book, patted on the railing of the chair twice, and squinted at her indifferently. So, I want to ask child to return this book to me. Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes, and braced herself to look at him. What if I don't want to? Chu Luchen smiled, and his appearance was peerless, but did this kind of domineering behavior really fit his identity? Qin Wanru was quite speechless. Child, this book is mine. Qin Wanru stated again. So. Chu Luchen put down his hand, stretched out a hand, and maliciously pulled a strand of her hair. Her hair was very soft and comfortable to touch. Chu Luchen now wanted to touch her hair when he saw it. Even if he couldn't touch it, it would be good to pull it. Her hair was very similar to the cat he raised. They both had soft hair. Naturally, he pulled her away without hesitation. Ouch! Qin Wanru did not expect that he would pull her hair so badly. She screamed and hurriedly reached out to pat his hand. Chu Liuchen's hand nimbly slid past her hand and pinched her slightly puffed little face. He was in a good mood and laughed. This girl is really interesting. He loved to see her look like she was angry and annoyed, but couldn't do anything to him. Just like at this moment, her upper lip was slightly puckered, and her cherry lips were tightly pursed. Her cheeks were puffed up as if she was about to blow bubbles out of anger. This feeling was really interesting. Child, what do you want to do to return it to me? Qin Wanru subconsciously reached out to pat his hand again. Of course, she didn't pat his hand. She looked around and simply put the small stool back to stay away from Chu Luchen. Then she sat down again and asked. Where is the seal? Seeing her pull the small stool, Chu Luchen didn't stop her. He seemed to be in a very good mood. What's wrong? Qin Wanru immediately sat up straight and said warily. Give it to me. Chu Luchen said lazily. That's what I got when I helped you take care of the Tang Qianyan, Qin Wanru said. Has the Tang Qianyan blossomed? How was the care? Chu Luchen raised his handsome eyebrows and squinted at her with a meaningful look. His question made Qin Wanru speechless and a little guilty. The flower didn't blossom, nor did it die. But it didn't look very energetic. When she went up the mountain, she specially asked Nanny Yu to take care of the Tang Qianyan. She didn't know how it was now. The soil here is not very good. After thinking for a while, Qin Wanru explained anxiously in her heart. Does it mean that it will get better when we arrive in the capital? Chu Luchen said with a smile. His words made Qin Wanru more anxious and she secretly complained in her heart. She had thought that this master would just play with it for a few days and then give it back to him. Whether it lived or died had nothing to do with her. Your Highness, you don't intend to raise this flower by yourself? You can raise it for me. Chu Luchen reached out and touched his chin with a playful look, as if it was a matter of course. As long as you raise the Tang Qianyan blossomed. Therefore, she had to raise it until it died. She had to raise it to be energetic and beautiful. Qin Wanru felt very stressed. She bit her lips and her long eyelashes fluttered twice. She lowered her head and looked unhappy. Then, what about my medical book? After thinking for a while, Qin Wanru said helplessly. Anyway, it didn't die. Maybe there would be a time when it blossomed. She could raise it slowly. Give me the seal. Chu Luchen said in a relaxed and natural manner with a little tiredness in his eyes. Okay, I will give you the seal. Qin Wanru just hesitated for a moment and immediately agreed. Then she asked tentatively, what about the flower? You also have to raise the flower well, otherwise how can you get the seal? Chu Luchen said persistently. Therefore, the seal still belonged to him. He still had to help him raise the Tang Qianyan, which was very difficult to raise, into a flower. In exchange, he would get his medical book. This medical book originally belonged to him, but it was stolen by him. He used his own things to exchange for her to do things for him. Moreover, it seemed that she took advantage of him. It seemed that she exchanged one seal for two things of him. Qin Wanru felt very aggrieved, really aggrieved. But she was determined to get this medical book. Okay, Your Highness, don't worry. I will remember it. The flower will grow well for you. Qin Wanru said. She didn't believe that she really couldn't raise it well. At the worst, she could go to the capital city and hire a capable gardener. It was just a pot of flower. Okay. Chu Luchen seemed to be very satisfied with this and said with a smile. Although he looked young, Qin Wanru felt that he was like a fox that had become a demon. A black-bellied male demon. Then please give me the book, Your Highness. Taking a deep breath, Qin Wanru put away the resentment in her watery eyes and said with a serious face. You also give it to me? Chu Luchen also reached out a hand. His expression was exactly the same as Qin Wanru's. He even felt a little aggrieved, as if he was the one who was bullied. He looked at her with a little doubt and said, Do you want to get something for nothing? Qin Wanru repeatedly told herself not to be angry and not to be angry. She secretly gritted her teeth and swallowed her anger. Your Highness, what do you want? The seal. Don't tell me you didn't bring it with you. You won't put away such an important thing casually. Chu Luchen looked up and down Qin Wanru, as if he was looking for where she was hiding. His words made Qin Wanru's face turn red. Why don't you want to take it out? Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows. You want it now? Qin Wanru gritted her teeth and looked around. Don't tell me you still want to owe me. I have suffered such a loss, but you still did such a thing. It's too much. Chu Luchen complained. Qin Wanru was sweating. Is this man a drama queen? Chu Luchen complained. He made it seem like she was a scum who abandoned his wife and son. I'll go to the room to get it. Qin Wanru suddenly stood up and couldn't stand it anymore. She couldn't unbutton her collar outside because it was hanging on her neck. Chu Luchen didn't make it difficult for her this time. He smiled and waved his hand, indicating that she could go into the room. Qing Yu followed Qin Wanru into the room and helped her to unbutton her collar. She took out the seal hanging on her neck and helped her to fasten the button again. When everything was done, Qin Wanru returned to the yard with Qing Yu. She handed over the seal in her hand and said unhappily, Here you are. Chu Luchen reached out his hand with a smile. Qin Wanru suddenly withdrew her hand and asked, Prince, when are you going to give it back to me? This seal was very important to her and she would never give it up. Look at the flower. Chu Luchen seemed to be in a good mood and his beautiful eyebrows were relaxed. What if the flower doesn't bloom? Qin Wanru thought it was better to ask clearly. Then this seal is this king's. Chu Luchen smiled ambiguously. He didn't rush to reach out his hand at this time. He leaned back and lay down leisurely, not anxious or impatient. He was really stubborn. Prince, what do you want this seal for? Is it of no use to you? Qin Wanru laughed dryly and said. This Prince Chen was so difficult to deal with. She almost felt dizzy because he didn't get dizzy after going round and round. But she really didn't understand why Chu Luchen would care about her. Whether it's of use or not, I know. Chu Luchen looked at her and saw her slightly pouted mouth. A trace of leisure flashed in his beautiful eyes. His words were quite meaningful. He reached out and patted the medical book in his hand twice. Don't you want this book? Yes. Qin Wanru knew he was threatening her with the medical book, but she had to accept the threat. She gritted her teeth and tightly held the seal in her hand to give it to him. In Qin Wanru's reluctant eyes, Chu Luchen elegantly reached out and took the seal. He shook it in front of his eyes and glanced at Qin Wanru proudly. Then he pushed the medical book to Qin Wanru and said, Here you are. Seeing that the medical book was almost pushed to the ground, Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to take it. This medical book is good. I wonder who gave it to you. Chu Luchen asked casually. Qin Wanru was afraid of breaking the medical book. She lowered her head and looked through it carefully. She didn't notice the dim light in his eyes when he said this. She just said casually, "It was given by the master of Jingshin Monastery." "You want to learn medical skills from the master of Jingshin Monastery?" Chu Luchen looked at the little head in front of him. He didn't control his hand and reached out to pull the two buns of her hair. "Ah! It hurts." Qin Wanru didn't raise her head. She reached out and patted the position of the hand that was messing around on her head. Chapter 74. Not the abbess of Jingshin Monastery, but the junior sister of Jingshin Monastery. Qin Wanru didn't slap the messy hand on her head and answered casually. She had achieved her goal here, so she naturally stood up and said goodbye. "You're leaving now?" Chu Luchen asked with a smile. He seemed to be in a good mood and was easy to talk to. "Of course, it was just a look. Is there anything else, child?" Qin Wanru probed carefully. "I'm fine. It's just that if you have something to do, you will come to me later." Chu Luchen sighed with a gentle and harmless smile. If Qin Wanru didn't have any contact with him before, she would definitely think so too. "I have something to do later." Qin Wanru blinked her eyes and didn't know whether he was serious or joking. "I don't know. I'm tired and I'm going to sleep. I didn't sleep well last night, and my arm hurts too." Chu Luchen closed his eyes and immediately changed from an elegant and handsome young man to a sickly and handsome young man. Qin Wanru blushed and stared at Chu Luchen with shame and anger. She turned around and left with shame and anger. She was afraid that if she stayed any longer, she might not be able to control herself and hit this sickly and handsome young man. Of course, she was just thinking about it. Hearing the footsteps leaving in a hurry, Chu Luchen opened his eyes. There was a clear smile on his pale lips with a little bit of tiredness of a young man. "Child, Her Highness asks you to come back to the capital city. There's a letter." A guard hurriedly turned around from the dark corner outside the room and presented a letter respectfully. "I won't read it," Chu Luchen said lightly. Although there was still a smile on his face, it seemed to be chilling to the bones. Xiao Xuanzi hurriedly lowered his head and looked at his nose and mouth, motionless as if he was a wooden man. "But Her Highness has something important to tell you." Feeling the chilling atmosphere in the air, the guard didn't dare to raise his head. His slender and white fingers reached over and picked up the letter in the guard's hand. The guard heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Finally, this child was willing to read the letter, and he could finally report to his people. But the next moment, the relaxed expression froze on his face. He heard the sound of paper tearing and the gentle words of the young man, "Tell her to give up. Now that you're putting in so much effort, what were you doing earlier? I really can't tell that she actually has such a motherly heart." These words were very gentle, but with the meaning in these words, there was a gloomy and bloodthirsty atmosphere. The guard could no longer stand and knelt down with a plop sound. "Wang Ye," Chu Luchen waved his hand and said impatiently, "Go back and tell her that I won't die for the time being. Tell her not to pretend to care about me for no reason. I'm not a 3-year-old child who can be fooled by her." After that, he turned his head, picked up a handkerchief to cover his mouth, and coughed violently. Xiao Xuanzi immediately panicked. He hurried over and gently patted his back. "Master, are you okay? Don't worry. Take your time." Chu Luchen continued to cough, and it seemed that he couldn't stop for a while. "Hurry up and go down." Xiao Xuanzi gently patted Chu Luchen's back and shouted at the guard who was still kneeling. The guard didn't dare to say anything more, and hurriedly left. After the guard left, Chu Luchen coughed for a long time before he stopped. Xiao Xuanzi brought him warm water, and he drank a few mouthfuls before he recovered. "Master, are you okay?" Xiao Xuanzi looked worried. "I'm okay, I won't die." Chu Luchen's lips curved up with a touch of sarcasm. His lips were as pale as white paper, and anyone could see that he was not in good condition. Master, let's ask the master of Jingshin Monastery to come and see you, okay? Maybe she's the person we're looking for, and the Dr. Qi mentioned is also in this area. Xiao Xuanzi advised. He had actually advised several times these days. Since the master of Jingshin Monastery might be the person they were looking for, why didn't his master come to see her? The longer this body was delayed, the worse it would be. What's the hurry? Chu Luchen finally stopped coughing. He touched his head, which was a little painful due to coughing, and leaned back heavily on the lounge chair. Master, the earlier the better. Xiao Xuanzi came to him and gently rubbed his forehead. He knew that every time he coughed violently, he would feel dizzy and headache for a while. If I recover, others will worry about me. It's not bad to live like this. He murmured in a low voice, but it was enough for Xiao Xuanzi to hear it clearly. Master. Xiao Xuanzi's eyes were red, and he was very worried. Are you really going to keep playing like this? Of course I'm going back. Chu Luchen said lightly, lying there with a calm face. There was no emotion in his voice, not a bit of joy or anger. Hearing that his master was going back, Xiao Xuanzi was relieved. He was really afraid that his master would just abandon himself like this, neither finding a doctor for him nor returning to the capital city. Thinking that if he continued like this, his master would probably die outside, Xiao Xuanzi felt that his heart was about to break into pieces. When are you going back, master? Xiao Xuanzi wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and asked. How many Fenghua glazed lamps have you found? Chu Luchen didn't answer the question. In the sunlight, his eyelashes were very long and curly, which made his face look almost transparent and pale, extremely sick. There are already 7 or 8 of them. Xiao Xuanzi answered. Although Fenghua glazed lamps were precious, there were actually many of them. When he passed by the capital city and came to Jiangzhou, he had collected 7 or 8. Master, do you want to check them carefully? No, I don't have anyone to help me. It's good enough to find these few. Does anyone really expect me to find anything? Chu Luchen said lightly. The Fenghua glazed lamp in Ningyuan Army General's mansion was originally an accident. He just blew up the little girl casually. He didn't expect that there really was one, and it didn't look like those Fenghua glazed lamps before. It was really an accident. But he didn't intend to tell anyone about this accident. So what if it was an accident or not? Who was afraid? Originally, this matter was just an excuse. No one expected him to accomplish anything. They probably hoped that he would die outside. That would be the end of all troubles. Master, I think second Miss Qin looks like her. Xiao Xuanzi was Chu Liuchen's henchman, so he naturally knew what excuse Chu Luchen used to leave the capital city this time. It doesn't matter whether she looks like her or not. Ningyuan Army General's daughter is also good. Chu Luchen curved his lips. His face, which was pale just now, looked a little more lively because of his smile. He didn't look like a handsome young man in an ink painting, who was beautiful but not lively. Master, you can ignore this matter, but what about your own matter? The Empress Dowager has been urging you for a long time, and even the Emperor. So, you have to think about it. Xiao Xuanzi gently rubbed Chu Liuchen's forehead and reminded him softly. Since they were going back to the capital city, that troublesome matter must be sent to his master again. Of course, I will think about it. Chu Luchen smiled. Even if he didn't open his eyes, his eyebrows and eyes were curved. The handsome young man of 14 or 15 was so beautiful that he didn't look like a real person. At this moment, Xiao Xuanzi secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Even if he didn't look like a real person, his master was still the best looking. Moreover, his master smiled like this, which meant that he had a well-thought-out plan. Master, do you want to ask the master of Jingshin Monastery to treat your illness? Seeing that he was in a good mood, Xiao Xuanzi immediately suggested. Okay. Chu Luchen didn't refuse this time. Then I will arrange it now. Xiao Xuanzi said excitedly. You don't have to do it, just let Qin Huayong do it. Chu Luchen casually ordered. Okay, okay. As long as Chu Luchen was willing to see a doctor, Xiao Xuanzi didn't care about anything, so he kept nodding. His master's illness was brought from the womb, also known as fetal poison. He was born with a poor body, and everyone thought that his master wouldn't live long. Even the imperial physicians in the palace couldn't do anything about it. They just said that they would do their best and leave it to fate, and it was impossible to cure it completely. But in fact, it wasn't all like that. His master's health was not hopeless. Xiao Xuanzi had an inexplicable sense of trust in Chu Luchen. He felt that as long as his master was willing, it wouldn't be a problem. Since Chu Luchen had a clear answer, Xiao Xuanzi also felt relieved. After leaving the capital city, he was anxious every day, afraid that his master would give up on himself if he was unhappy. When Qin Wanru came back, she saw Chu Luchen lying on a wide reclining chair, with a light orchid pillow on his head. He closed his eyes and seemed to be asleep. He was covered with a wide black cloak, and there was a cluster of bamboo on the cloak, showing elegance. Even though she had seen him several times, Qin Wanru had to admit that Chu Luchen always gave people a feeling of extreme handsomeness. Every move of his was like a painting, with a sense of nobility and immortality. Even if he was lying silently, he still gave people a feeling of peace and happiness. Seeing her coming back, Xiao Xuanzi didn't seem to be surprised. He reached out and gently waved to her. Qin Wanru collected her thoughts and walked forward slowly. "Second Miss Qin, could you please massage my master's forehead? He coughed badly just now, and he hasn't recovered yet." Xiao Xuanzi lowered his voice for fear of disturbing Chu Luchen. "I'll go into the room to boil medicine for my master. Is there anyone else?" Qin Wanru looked around. "Yes, but those are guards. If they use too much strength, my master will feel pain." Xiao Xuanzi whispered. "So, your master is a glaze. Can't I use strength?" Qin Wanru was silent for a moment and nodded helplessly. Xiao Xuanzi was overjoyed. He bowed to her respectfully, and then gave up his position. However, he was squatting just now. At this time, he deliberately pulled over the stool where Qin Wanru sat before and invited her to sit down. "Second Miss Qin, please sit down and massage. It's more comfortable. I'll be back soon. My master should be asleep now. When will he wake up?" Qin Wanru suddenly had a bad feeling. I'm not sure. He can wake up immediately, or after a while. It depends on whether my master is tired or not. Xiao Xuanzi said implicitly with a bitter face. So, he still didn't know. Qin Wanru gritted her teeth gloomily. She thought that Chu Luchen did it on purpose. He knew that she would come back, and he also knew that she would come back. But the problem was that she was asking for help now. Chapter 75. Why did you come back? The youth's lazy voice was filled with a sense of laziness, especially in line with his current situation. "There's someone on the way." Qin Wanru didn't wonder why Chu Luchen knew that the massage therapist had changed. "People from Magistrate Chi's mansion." Chu Liuchen's lips curved up slightly. He reached out and massaged Qin Wanru's small hand in another place. "I don't want to see Miss Qi." Qin Wanru frowned unconsciously. She really didn't want to see Qi Rongji at this time, especially when Qi Rongji was so arrogant and had brought so many servant girls and old maids with her, as if she was going to intervene forcefully. They blocked her way back to Jingxin Monastery. Qin Yu had sharp eyes and saw such a large group of people from afar, so Qin Wanru hid again. "I heard that Miss Qi and the miss from your mansion are now the two biggest jokes in Jiangzhou. Their reputations are very bad. It's better to stay away from them. Remember to hang out with people with good reputations in the future. Of course, a good reputation may not be good. You can live longer if you have a good reputation." Chu Luchen said casually. His words were very reasonable. Qin Wanru was silent for a while. Learn from your mistakes. Not all actions need to be so rash to be undone. Chu Luqian seemed to be in a good mood. There was a smile on his handsome face. It was rare that he didn't bully Qin Wanru, nor did he deliberately drive Qin Wanru out. Qin Wanru thought that it would take a lot of effort to get Chu Luqian to take her in for a while. She looked at him with a little surprise. What? Do you think I'm wrong? Chu Luqian raised his eyebrows. Of course not. Whatever Prince says is right. Qin Wanru smiled awkwardly. She didn't want to go out to see Qi Rongji, so she couldn't offend Prince Chen in front of her. Do you really think I'm right? Chu Luqian suddenly opened his eyes and looked up. His ink-colored eyes were as clear as spring water. Harmless to humans and beasts. Of course I really think what Prince says is right. Qin Wanru was still sober. She wouldn't really think that Prince Chen was harmless to humans and beasts. This person was truly ruthless. She was now sitting on the stool, massaging Chu Liuqian's forehead. When he opened his eyes, their eyes were very close to each other. Qin Wanru could almost see his long and curly eyelashes flickering slightly. He was a handsome young man with a gentle smile, which was enough to make every girl fall in love with him. However, Qin Wanru believed that this kind of gentleness and harmlessness was only superficial. Her long eyelashes fluttered twice as she averted her gaze. Does Wang Ye's head still hurt? Her hands felt sore. It still hurts. The gentleness on the handsome young man's face faded away, replaced by a more harmless expression. He looked at her pitifully, and his light-colored lips made people feel more pity for him. Even if Qin Wanru was full of unwillingness, she had to swallow the words that just came out of her mouth at this time. Prince, I still have something to do, so I want to go first. Qin Wanru thought for a while and changed her way of saying. At this time, I have no value to you, so you want to leave. Chu Luqian raised the corner of his mouth again, and the smile diluted the illness on his face. He was another gentle and beautiful young man. If there was no luster of mockery in his black eyes, he would be even more like one. How could Wang Ye think so? I really have something to do. Aunt Shui is not with Grandma now, so I am alone. If Grandma can't find me, she will be worried. Qin Wanru's expression became more and more respectful. She looked at her nose and mouth. Her words were very appropriate, and the meaning was also very obvious. She also looked calm. However, she was anxious in her heart, not knowing whether Prince Chen would let her go or not. Chu Luqian stretched out his hand and massaged his forehead. He turned over and sat up, saying lazily, "Good massage. In the future, when I feel uncomfortable, please help me massage more. If there is a chance, I will definitely help Wang Ye." Qin Wanru didn't understand what he meant, so she responded carefully. Okay, you can go now. I have something to do here, so I won't see you off. Chu Luqian waved his hand and said generously. Qin Wanru felt relieved in her heart, stood up, and bowed to Chu Luqian. Wang Ye, Wanru will leave now. Go, go. Chu Luqian waved his hand. Seeing that he let her go, Qin Wanru felt relieved and turned to leave. When she arrived at the intersection of Jingxin Monastery, as expected, Qi Rongji was gone after such a delay, which saved her a lot of trouble. She had nothing to say to Qi Rongji, and she didn't think that Qi Rongji came to see her with good intentions. However, Qin Wanru didn't expect that although she hid from Qi Rongji, she couldn't hide from Qi Tianyu. Unexpectedly, Qi Tianyu was waiting for her outside the yard of the fragrant room where she lived. Seeing her coming, he walked out from behind a tree. Qin Wanru originally wanted to pretend that she didn't see him, but she had to stop when he shouted. Sister Wanru. Qi Tianyu hurried over. First young master of the Qi family, what's the matter? Qin Wanru stopped, bowed, and said politely. Then she took 2 steps back to keep a distance from Qi Tianyu. Sister Wanru, why are you so polite? Seeing Qin Wanru's movement, Qi Tianyu stopped and murmured, looking very embarrassed. First young master of the Qi family, we used to be on good terms, and you can be regarded as my future brother-in-law, so I didn't avoid you. But now, we are nothing. Qin Wanru raised her head, and there was a bit of coldness in her watery eyes. She looked at Qi Tianyu and said impolitely, I don't think it's necessary for first young master of the Qi family to see me at this time. After such a series of things, the relationship between the two families couldn't go back to the past. I still have a chance with Yuru in the future. Qi Tianyu murmured. Qin Wanru sneered and interrupted his words, first young master of the Qi family, are you really not sober or not awake? It's impossible for our two families to get married again, and it's impossible for us to be on good terms. What did big sister say to make first young master of the Qi family trust her so much and think that you two still have a future? Qin Wanru did not hesitate to remove the thin veil that Qi Tianyu pretended to be peaceful. You. Qin Wanru, you're so mean. Qi Tianyu's face changed, and he couldn't help getting angry. He looked at Qin Wanru with a bit of hatred and said, isn't it all because of you? If you didn't make such a fuss, Yuru would have been my wife by now, right? So, you're blaming this on me? I asked Qin Yuru to climb up the social ladder in the capital city, and the purpose was to rob you? Qi Tianyu, even if no one told you, please look at yourself in the mirror when you go out. Hearing Qi Tianyu's answer, Qin Wanru was not surprised at all. She sneered and looked at Qi Tianyu directly. There was a flash of bloodthirsty hostility in her eyes, and she clenched her hands so hard that her sharp fingers pricked her own palms. It hurt, but not as much as her own heartache. In her previous life, she was pushed into the abyss of blood mercilessly because of this inexplicable anger. Qi Tianyu, you're really nothing. The hatred of 2 lives and 2 lives was only this sentence in the end. After finishing her words, Qin Wanru turned around and walked to the gate of her courtyard. Qi Tianyu was stunned for a moment, and his handsome face froze for a moment. He had always been conceited, but was pulled away by Qin Wanru mercilessly. He was so angry that he reached out his hand and blocked Qin Wanru's way rudely. Seeing this, Qin Yu hurried forward and stood in front of Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, I don't care what you said. I only know that I like Yuru, and I will never like a mean and stupid person like you. These words were almost squeezed out of Qi Tianyu's mouth. At this moment, he could no longer maintain the image of an elegant child. His eyes seemed to be stained with poison, and he could no longer maintain his composure. If it were not for you, such a thing would not have happened. If it were not for you, Yuru would have to marry me. No matter what she thinks in her heart, this is the fact. She can't deny it even if she wants to. Qin Wanru, I will not let you go. Qi Tianyu said word by word. Qin Wanru could easily see the real hatred in his eyes. Looking at Qi Tianyu, who had lost his gentleness and dignity, she smiled slowly. Her bright watery eyes were filled with clear sarcasm. Although she was not tall, she did not show any weakness in height or age when she looked into Qi Tianyu's eyes. The corners of her red lips were slightly raised. There was a trace of childishness like that of a little girl, but there was also a kind of hostility like a sharp sword. His hostility was even more penetrating than Qi Tianyu's hatred. Qi Tianyu, I will wait for you and Qin Yuru to kill me together. We will not stop until one of us is dead. His words were very light, but his hostility seemed to be accompanied by the bloodthirst from the 9 serenities hell. After Qi Tianyu took a few steps back, he found that there was an inexplicable chill in his heart, which made him lose his composure and step back. Qin Wanru, who always made him feel stupid, had never been so fierce. For a moment, his eyes fell on Qin Wanru's straight back, and he seemed to be a little focused and enlightened. Qin Wanru sneered and walked past Qi Tianyu. She slightly raised her head, and a smile condensed on her face, with a malicious look. This was the hatred in her last life, and it was the words she did not say in her last life. Since they could not get along well, there was no need to pretend that everything was peaceful, and then guard against others secretly plotting against them. No matter what Qi Tianyu's purpose was today, she clearly knew that it would not be a friendly one. In her last life, even if Qi Tianyu later knew the truth, he had always been against her, and she had never figured it out. Now she found that no matter what the truth was, Qi Tianyu stubbornly pushed all the blame to her. He thought that she was the source of evil, and he wholeheartedly wanted to trample her into the mud. In this case, there was nothing to say. Chapter 76. Shocked by Qin Wanru's imposing manner, Qi Tianyu just watched Qin Wanru walk into the yard and close the door. "Child, what should we do?" Qi Hai mumbled when he saw Qin Wanru enter the yard. "Let's go back." Qi Tianyu pulled himself together and clenched his teeth to suppress the fear in his heart. She was just a little girl and it was useless for her to vent her anger. He secretly cursed himself for panicking just now. His back was actually drenched in cold sweat. "But about young Lady Qin?" Qi Hai said cautiously. Their purpose of coming here today was to ask Qin Wanru to put in a good word for Qin Yuru. Qi Tianyu even thought of pleasing Qin Wanru in order to get Qin Wanru to help Qin Yuru. He thought it was not a difficult thing. In the past, as long as he asked, Qin Wanru would do it. But Qi Tianyu did not expect Qin Wanru to be so fierce and fall out with him. Even before he could say anything to coax her, they had developed to the point of fighting to the death. Qi Tianyu did not know why things had gone beyond his imagination. Shouldn't Qin Wanru give in if he coaxed her a little? Let Yuru solve her own problem. She deserves it. Qi Tianyu said coldly as he turned around and walked out of Jingxin Monastery. He did not understand why Qin Wanru treated him like this. Could it be that there was some kind of trick in this? Like what Yuru said, Qin Wanru was playing hard to get. How could a little girl know so much? But young Lady Qin is going to the capital city. If you don't help her, it will be difficult for her and you. Qi Hai reminded him. In fact, Qi Tianyu knew it even without his reminder. Moreover, Qin Wanru had just ripped off the veil that covered his ugliness. Tell her that I can't help her. Let her take care of herself. Qi Tianyu was annoyed and even found Qin Yuru's words annoying. But, Miss Qin. She will blame young master. Qi Hai hurried to catch up with Qi Tianyu and walked out of the gate of Jingxin Monastery. She can blame me if she wants. From now on, just let her be. Qi Tianyu was getting more and more annoyed, but he couldn't understand why Qin Wanru dared to talk to him like this. She used to call him, Brother Tianyu. Was that delicate and innocent look of the past and that ruthless look just now really the same person? But, first Miss Qin. Qi Hai still wanted to speak for Qin Yuru, but was interrupted by Qi Tianyu impatiently. Are you my servant or Qin Yuru's servant? Why do you always speak for her? I am naturally young master's manservant. Qi Hai was stunned for a moment and hurriedly expressed his loyalty. Since you're one of my people, then shut up. Qi Tianyu said with a gloomy face. He strode outside. Qi Hai didn't dare to speak anymore and trotted behind him. Coming out of Jingxin Monastery, there was a large piece of flat land on the right. Some pilgrims' carriages and horses were parked there, and Qi Tianyu's horse was also tied to a tree on the side. Qi Tianyu walked over angrily. When he was about to untie the horse, he suddenly blacked out. Then he was hit hard on the head and he fell down instantly. The manservant walked behind him and fell down faster than him. Two people who looked like guards, one on each side, pulled them into the woods at the side. They kicked the two people who were half covered in the bags hard a few times until they hit the trees behind them. Only then did they leave. When Qi Tianyu woke up, it was already evening. It was still dark in front of him. He stretched out his hand and forcefully pulled off the sack on his head. Seeing that the sky had already darkened, he felt dizzy. He reached out his hand and touched his forehead, which had already swollen. Qi Hai also woke up at this time. After pulling off the sack, he saw Qi Tianyu's bruised face and shouted in shock. He hurriedly climbed over and cried, "Young master, what's wrong with you? Young master! Shut up!" Qi Tianyu snapped and sat up with his hand pressed on his forehead. He felt pain all over his body as if he had been stepped on. "Eldest young master, did someone plot against us? Why would someone plot against us?" Qi Hai also crawled up, one hand on his waist as he cried. They were inexplicably beaten, and the most important thing was that they didn't even know who did it. "Let's go back." Qi Tianyu knew that even if he wanted to find them, he might not be able to find them. Otherwise, they wouldn't put a sack on him and beat him. He struggled to stand up with the help of a tree on the side. When one of his feet stepped on the ground, he hurriedly shrank back because of the pain. He didn't know how his leg bone was. "Young master, are you okay? Your servant will help you." Qi Hai wiped his tears and also stood up, supporting Qi Tianyu. However, he was also not well. He didn't know where his foot had hit, and he was slightly limping. Qi Tianyu gritted his teeth and walked out with the help of the manservant. He was going to the capital city early tomorrow morning. "Your servant will go back and ask the magistrate to investigate." The manservant angrily wiped his tears and said, "No need. It must be Ning Yuan army general." A trace of coldness flashed in Qi Tianyu's eyes. In Jiangzhou prefecture, if there was anyone who dared to beat the magistrate, there was no one except Qin Huayong. It must be Qin Huayong who sent someone to follow Qin Wanru, and then found out that he was chasing after Qin Wanru. Speaking of this, Qi Tianyu also felt guilty, so he didn't dare to make more trouble. This time he went up the mountain secretly, and he didn't want his father to know, so he had to suffer the loss. However, Qi Tianyu didn't expect that this was not the last time he was beaten by Qin Wanru. Watching the master and servant leave, the figures of two guards appeared behind the tree. They looked at each other and silently left to report to their master. Qin Wanru didn't know that after Qi Tianyu left here, he was put in a sack and severely beaten. However, when the news of Qi Tianyu's departure came to her the next day, she was very happy. The reason why she got the news of Qi Tianyu by accident was that someone in the mansion said that Qin Yuru had gone to the capital city last night. Calculating the time, it was the time when Qi Tianyu was looking for trouble, so she asked the old maid in the mansion about Qi Tianyu's news. One went to the capital city to find a relative, and the other went to the capital city to go to the bedroom. They staggered when they walked, as if they didn't have any contact. However, Qin Wanru believed that they would still have contact in the future. However, she wasn't afraid. In this life, she wouldn't be the Qin Wanru who was framed by them and inexplicably thought that they were wrong. The medical book was sent to the meditation room of the master of Jingshin Monastery the next morning. Just like last time, the meditation room of the master of Jingshin Monastery was very quiet. She was the only one reciting scriptures on the rush cushion. After Qin Wanru was brought in, she chose another rush cushion and sat down. She picked up the medical book and read it carefully. The master of Jingshin Monastery recited scriptures for a long time, but Qin Wanru didn't feel annoyed at all. She had been quietly reading the medical book and didn't seem to be affected. In fact, when a nun came in and asked if she wanted to have lunch, she just shook her head. It was so peaceful in the room that people seemed to forget about lunch. The master of Jingshin Monastery didn't stop, and Qin Wanru didn't leave either. When the master of Jingshin Monastery stopped reciting scriptures, she opened her eyes and looked at Qin Wanru calmly. Qin Wanru put down the medical book in her hand and bowed to the master of Jingshin Monastery respectfully. Then she presented the medical book beside her hand. "Do you really want to learn medicine?" The master of Jingshin Monastery looked at the medical book and asked. "I really want to learn." Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at the master of Jingshin Monastery with clear eyes. She was determined. Learning medicine is actually very hard. The master of Jingshin Monastery sighed and said, "My junior sister thought that you are suitable for it, but actually I don't think so. Thanks to Mingqiu Nun's love, I will try my best." Qin Wanru's eyes were burning with eagerness. "This matter, you should ask her for her own opinion." The master of Jingshin Monastery shook her head helplessly and pointed outside with a subtle smile. "Do you need me to ask someone to bring you there?" "No, thank you." Qin Wanru smiled and bowed respectfully again. Then she stood up. "Do you mind bringing me lunch?" The master of Jingshin Monastery smiled. Such a smart and patient child was the best for her to learn medicine. Moreover, her junior sister had found that this child was very talented. She just didn't know what her junior sister thought now. Her junior sister also had a childish temper. Previously, she wanted to take Qin Wanru as her disciple, but now she was reluctant. "I don't mind." Qin Wanru nodded. The lunch was in the food basket outside the door. Qin Yu came to carry it. Qin Wanru didn't ask who Jingshin Monastery wanted to give it to, and only let Qin Yu follow her to carry the food basket. This was considered as passing the test of Jingshin Monastery master, but the next test was the most important. After all, she wanted to be apprenticed to Mingqiu Nun and learn medicine. It all depended on Mingqiu Nun's opinion now. The door of the hut was still locked. From the outside, it seemed that there was still no one. Qin Yu put down the lunch in her hand and looked around in astonishment. There was no one around. "Miss, is this the place where Mingqiu Nun lives?" "It should be." Qin Wanru nodded. She had seen Mingqiu Nun in Jingshin Monastery before. If it wasn't by chance, she wouldn't know that Mingqiu Nun actually lived here instead of Jingshin Monastery. But, there is no one here. What should I do? Where should I send the lunch? Qin Yu said blankly. Her eyes fell on the iron lock in front of the door. The iron lock was hanging high. How could there be anyone here? Qin Wanru lifted the food basket from the ground and carefully brought it to the door of the hut. Her watery eyes fell on the tightly locked iron lock, and she carefully looked at it. A locked house was indeed unlikely to be inhabited, but what if it was not locked? As she thought so, she looked at the iron lock more and more carefully. When she saw it clearly, she couldn't help showing a knowing smile on her face. Her red lips were slightly raised. She had neglected it last time. Chapter 77. The lock fell off. Qin Yu's eyes almost popped out. She couldn't believe that the chain was still locked but fell on the ground. She murmured to herself, "It's not locked, it's just hanging on the door." Who would have thought that the lock was actually just hanging on the buckle on the door? The door was not locked. Not bad, you've observed it carefully. Laughter came from the door. Mingqiu Nun. Qin Wanru took a step back and said respectfully. The door was opened in Qin Yu's astonished eyes. A nun appeared in front of them. She was about 30 years old and looked much younger than the master of Jingshin Monastery. Even if she wore plain clothes, she still looked beautiful and gentle. She looked at Qin Wanru with her curved eyes and looked kind and amiable. "Do you really want to learn medicine?" Mingqiu Nun looked at Qin Wanru with a smile and a gentle attitude. "I really want to learn medicine." Qin Wanru nodded and knelt down. "Nun, please accept me as your disciple." Mingqiu Nun didn't answer immediately. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. She looked at her carefully and the smile on her face became more obvious. She originally thought highly of Qin Wanru, but she was rejected by old Madam Qin and Qin Wanru. Later, she gave up the idea. This time, she heard that Qin Wanru wanted to learn medicine again. She was afraid that Qin Wanru just did it on a whim, so she deliberately set up several tests. Tests of scheming, eyesight, and patience. And Qin Wanru passed all of them. She was more and more satisfied with Qin Wanru. "In this case, you can learn medicine from me." Hearing that Mingxiu Nun agreed, Qin Wanru was overjoyed and respectfully bowed to Mingxiu Nun several times. Mingxiu Nun smiled and helped her up. She turned around and walked inside with her. When they entered the room, Qin Wanru respectfully bowed to Mingxiu Nun again and served the tea passed by Qin Yu. Then she accepted the order and stood up. Have you read the medical book that I gave you before? Mingxiu Nun took the tea, took a sip, put it aside and asked. Yes, I have. Qin Wanru answered. In this case, I'll test you. Master, please set the question. You don't have to call me master. You are not a monk, and you are the daughter of an aristocratic family. My disciple is naturally a monk. You can still call me a nun. Mingxiu Nun said with a smile. Yes. Qin Wanru nodded. Then Mingxiu Nun asked questions about some contents and practical operations in the medical book. With the medical skills she learned in the last life, and after waking up in this life, she carefully studied the medical book. No matter what Mingxiu Nun asked, Qin Wanru answered fluently without any pause. This made Mingxiu Nun more satisfied. She went into the inner room, took out a small iron box and pushed it to Qin Wanru. You go to my senior sister's place and take her medical book. That book is the second one in your hand. It focuses more on practical movements and specific treatment of symptoms than the previous one. There is also a set of golden needles used for acupuncture. Now you are in Jingxin Monastery. Come here every morning to learn. If you go back to the mansion, come here at the beginning or the middle of the month to learn practical skills. Thank you, Nun. Qin Wanru was overjoyed and took it with both hands respectfully. After coming back from Mingxiu Nun's place, Qin Wanru went to the meditation room of the master of Jingxin Monastery. She took the second half of the medical book and went back to see Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager's body was stable and she seemed to be in a good mood. She was just worried that Shui Rulan was not fully prepared, so she asked Qin Wanru to go and see what else needed. No matter what was needed, there was no need to care about money. Madame Dowager took 5 silver notes to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru knew that Madame Dowager was afraid that Madame D would make trouble again. She nodded immediately. She was also worried about Madame D. With her temperament, she would not be willing to be arrested without putting up a fight. Even if Madame Dowager did not mention it, she also wanted to see Shui Rulan. The manor at the foot of Jingxin Monastery was not big, but it had been decorated with a lot of noise. The big red happiness character was hung on the door. It was obvious that there was going to be a wedding soon. The surrounding families were also very interested in this sudden happy event. They walked around the manor in groups of 3 to 5 to watch the bustling scene and asked about some gossip. When Qin Wanru came here in a carriage, she saw some people around the door, pointing at them and watching them. Seeing the carriage coming, some bolder people deliberately turned to the front of the carriage and wanted to see who was in the carriage. The carriage stopped at the door. Qin Wanru held Qin Yu's hand and got off the carriage. People who saw it were all amazed. This. Whose miss is she? She is so beautiful, like a little fairy. Someone whispered to the people beside him. Is she second Miss Qin? Someone seemed to have seen her before. He was surprised and his voice was a little loud. Qin Wanru tilted her head slightly and saw a man in his 30s. He was dressed like an ordinary villager. He was thin and small and looked a little wretched. When he saw Qin Wanru turned her head, he avoided looking at her. Qin Wanru turned back and held Qin Yu to walk inside. Second Miss Qin. Which family's second miss is she from? Someone asked in a low voice. He had not guessed Qin Wanru's identity at the moment. Qin was not a small surname. There were many families with the surname Qin in Jiangzhou. Whether it was the Qin's mansion of Ningyuan army general or the Qin's mansion of other big families, they were all wealthy families in the eyes of the villagers. The misses in their mansions were all worthy of the title of Mississippi. She is the second miss of Ningyuan army general's mansion. It was still the man's voice. Qin Wanru's lips curled up into a cold smile. Although she used to walk on the street, she was not as favored as Qin Yuru. Of course, she could not be as casual as Qin Yuru, so she did not walk on the street often. A villager could recognize her at a glance, and he was so sure. His behavior was a little sneaky. It was not normal no matter how she looked at it. She is the one who smashed the bridal sedan chair. When the man said this, many people immediately understood and made a sound of realization. Qin Wanru entered the courtyard and waved her hand to let the servants close the door. But she did not leave and stood still. She is the second Miss Qin. I don't know what she is going to do. Could it be that she wants to arrange another marriage with the eldest young master of Magistrate Qi? The man's somewhat instigating voice came from outside the door. It was not very low, so Qin Wanru could hear it clearly inside the door. Her pink cherry lips curled up, and her smile was cold. No way. It is impossible. Didn't they say that the marriage has been dissolved? A few people asked. This matter was known by the whole Jiangzhou people. Even if the villager was not there at that time, he had heard about it. You wait and see. It is going to be lively again. Just wait and see when the bridal sedan chair is smashed. The man said proudly. Then there were some deliberately biased words, which made Qin Yu's face turn blue. Miss, I will go to teach him a lesson, in case he talks nonsense there. Okay, take the two old maids at the door with you. Qin Wanru did not stop them. She turned back with a slight smile, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. Yes, miss. Qin Yu didn't expect that Qin Wanru would agree so readily. She was immediately overjoyed and opened the door with the two old maids who had just closed the door. The two old maids held two sticks as thick as the mouth of a bowl in their hands. The door of the courtyard was suddenly opened, and Qin Yu walked out. She turned around and walked in the direction of the man. Two old maids followed behind her with sticks in their hands. At the sight of this posture, the people outside the door were all stunned and looked at the three of them in astonishment. Qin Wanru also turned back and stood in front of the door, looking at the scene in front of her coldly. The man shrank back and wanted to hide behind others. However, Qin Yu was coming for him, so he could not avoid her. She walked in front of him and gave him a hard slap. Smashing the bridal sedan chair. Do you want to see it again? Or do you want to deliberately make trouble again? Hey, why did you hit me? The man was stunned by the slap. He touched his burning face and responded immediately. He immediately reached out and wanted to slap Qin Yu back. After Qin Yu slapped him, she stepped back. The two old maids came forward and raised the sticks in their hands high. The man who wanted to rush over was so scared that he did not dare to be rude. Who are you? Why do you talk nonsense here? Do you want to deliberately make trouble? Qin Yu raised her head and said coldly. She also learned a little from Qin Wanru's behavior these days. Now she took it out and it was quite good. You little girl, what nonsense are you talking about? The man said angrily. Everyone is gossiping. Why did you hit us? Don't tell me that General's mansion doesn't allow us to speak. Sure enough, he was a troublemaker. He actually made his own problem into everyone's problem and put General's mansion on the opposite side of everyone. This was not something an ordinary villager could do. Qin Wanru smiled coldly and waited for him to continue. No matter what was going on, at least it would not be a good time for it to happen. She revealed the matter now and caught others unprepared. Other people are just watching the fun, but you are slandering our general's mansion. I don't know who sent you as a spy. How dare you slander our general's mansion and ruin our marriage? Qin Yu sneered and took 2 steps forward. Who gave you such courage to do such a thing? Her words were aggressive. The matter suddenly escalated to the level of going against General's mansion, which made the others present unable to stand it. They looked around and all retreated to the sides, leaving only the man. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm just watching the fun, there are so many things that I have to say. Seeing that the people who could hide themselves retreated to the sides, the man panicked and argued loudly. You're just watching the fun, but you still want to deliberately stir up trouble. You really have a bad intention. Don't let General's mansion find out that you have done something wrong, otherwise, you will be punished for both crimes. Qin Yu sneered and warned him. She turned back and walked to Qin Wanru, with 2 old maids still following behind. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the man. She saw his face changed slightly and looked panicky. He was even more panicky than when he was slapped by Qin Yu. He already had a plan in his mind. Qin Wanru took Qin Yu back to the yard. Shui Rulan had already received the message and asked someone to invite her over. In the main room, the red silk was hung down, and the red characters of happiness were pasted everywhere. Although Shui Rulan's clothes were not red, they were not white as usual either. It was a set of aqua blue clothes embroidered with red patterns, which made her look younger than usual. Wanru, what happened? When he saw Qin Wanru, he pulled her over and carefully looked at her face. When he found that there was no accident, he was relieved. Chapter 78. I'm fine. Qin Wanru shook her head with a smile and comforted her. Grandma asked me to come here to see how the decoration is going. Is there anything else you need? If not, we can buy more. Grandma said that she hopes you can marry into the general's mansion with honor. She doesn't want you to feel wronged. As Qin Wanru said, she took out several bank notes given by old grandma and put them all in Shui Rulan's hand. Aunt Shui, Grandma is afraid that you don't have enough money, so she asked me to give you some more. Looking at the bank notes in her hand, Shui Rulan knew that it was old grandma's private money again. She felt sad. Old grandma really treated her as her daughter. She had been so devoted to her for so many years. Aunt Shui, if there is anything wrong, you should ask Nanny Duan to come back and tell us immediately. This is not the mansion. Qin Wanru blinked her bright eyes and reminded Shui Rulan. Shui Rulan's face calmed down, but her eyes also flashed a trace of sharpness. She was not stupid. How could she not understand Qin Wanru's meaning? She immediately nodded and said, Wanru, don't worry. If there is anything wrong, I won't force myself. Hearing her words, Qin Wanru was relieved. She was afraid that Shui Rulan would miscalculate and make a mistake first. At that time, it would be too late to regret. Since the matter had been settled, after chatting with Shui Rulan for a while, Qin Wanru winked at Nanny Duan and left. Nanny Duan followed her and walked out together. Nanny Duan, help me find out who was slapped by Qin Yu at the door just now. Send someone else to keep an eye on him. Standing in the corridor, Qin Wanru ordered in a low voice. This wretched man was extremely suspicious. If she didn't care about him just now, he would have escaped. Nanny Duan knew the seriousness of the matter. She immediately nodded and asked someone to go out to inquire about this man. Soon, they heard about this man. He is a local ruffian in this place. He usually doesn't do proper work. He has an old mother at home and married a wife. Later, she found that he didn't do proper work, so she ran away with someone else. His friends are all riffraff. He is not a good person. Nanny Duan reported the news to Qin Wanru. Where does this ruffian hang out in the past? Standing on the path, Qin Wanru casually picked up a falling red maple leaf from the ground and asked faintly while looking at a broken leaf hole in the maple leaf. I heard that he's just hanging around in these few villages. He's doing quite well in these villages. Everyone in the surrounding villages knows about him. He even has some reputation in the village. Nanny Duan was a careful person. She had been prepared for Qin Wanru's questions when she asked someone to inquire about Qin Wanru. Not in Jiangzhou City, asked Qin Wanru. He's not in Jiangzhou City. There are many local ruffians in Jiangzhou City. As a ruffian who can't even make a name for himself, it's better for him to stay in his own place. Originally, he just didn't starve to death. But these days, he suddenly became rich. Nanny Duan frowned. As she said that, she also felt that something was wrong. When did this happen? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and showed a faint smile on her pink and tender face. She knew in her heart that it should be him. Last night, he not only brought a lot of food for his old mother, but also called several brothers who used to hang out with him and had a feast. Nanny Duan had experienced a lot of things. Although it was Qin Wanru who asked, when she answered, she still sensed a lot of meanings. Second miss, is there any problem with this ruffian? Why did he bring a lot of money back when Miss Shui is about to get married here? What does he want to do by inviting some people who don't do proper work to have a feast? The more she thought about it, the more suspicious she felt. I originally just wanted to see what kind of person he was who dared to pick others from the crowd and pour dirty water on the general's mansion. Nanny Duan, do you think we should tell Grandma? Qin Wanru bit her small cherry lips and looked very embarrassed. Her childish little face was tangled, which made her look very pitiful. She shook the maple leaf in her hand and narrowed her eyes. It's better not to tell old Grandma about this. I will ask someone to keep an eye on him and make sure he won't make any trouble on that day. Nanny Duan thought for a while and said. Before the truth was clear, Nanny Duan thought it was better not to disturb Madame Dowager. If it was just a false alarm or there was no evidence to prove it, Madame Dowager would just be more worried and it wouldn't play any substantial role. Then I'll have to trouble you, Nanny. If you find anything else, you must remember to tell Grandma or Father. Qin Wanru looked up at Nanny Duan and urged. Nanny Duan was a steady person, but it was a matter of great importance and there was no room for any mistake. Second miss, don't worry, I understand. Nanny Duan's face became serious. Obviously, because of Qin Wanru's repeated reminders, she really took this matter to heart. Qin Wanru picked up the leaf in her hand and got close to the broken leaf hole. She looked up at the sky and saw a sky with holes in it. The sky was actually very big, but because of the hole in the leaf, she could only see such a small part of the sky. Maybe this was the meaning of a leaf obstructing the eyes. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth and showed a trace of a cold arc. In this place, how could she be obstructed? After talking with Nanny Duan, Qin Wanru did not stay long and went into the room to say goodbye to Shui Rulan. Then she returned to Jingxin Monastery with Qin Yu and was ready to wait for the news from Nanny Duan. She and Nanny Duan did not mention Madame D, but both of them knew that if there was any change, it must be Madame D's doing. In the next few days, Qin Wanru was very peaceful. In the morning, she first went to Jing Qiu Nun's place to learn medical skills, and in the afternoon, she went to chat with old Grandma and let old Grandma relax. With the foundation of her previous life, she could learn anything with half the effort. Jing Qiu Nun saw that it was not difficult to teach other skills, so she skipped some basic skills and directly taught her acupuncture skills. In a few days, Qin Wanru's hands had been densely pricked with many small acupuncture wounds, especially the part between the thumb and index finger, which was the simplest and convenient place to be pricked. However, she was unfamiliar with it at the beginning, so her white and tender little hands were red and swollen. Old Grandma was so distressed that she almost forced Qin Wanru to stop learning. However, Qin Wanru had made up her mind. She endured the pain even though her hands were swollen like steamed buns. Every time, she smiled like a flower and did not complain at all. Old Grandma had no choice but to say nothing. Fortunately, except for the first few inaccurate positions of the needles, Qin Wanru's following needles were basically very smooth. The swelling on her hand also gradually reduced from the initial high steamed bun shape. Coupled with the medicine that Jing Qiu Nun prepared for her, the swelling was very effective. A few days passed in a flash. In the afternoon, after chatting with old Grandma for a while, Qin Wanru walked out of old Grandma's place and saw Nanny Duan rushing to her, so she stopped. Second miss. Nanny Duan walked very hurriedly and was sweating. Seeing Qin Wanru's small body blocking the door of the courtyard, she hurriedly stopped and said while wiping her sweat. Inexplicably, she had regarded Qin Wanru as the backbone. Nanny, did something happen? Seeing the sweat stains on Nanny Duan's face, Qin Wanru waved to her, then turned to walk aside and whispered to Nanny Duan, who followed her. Second miss, something really happened. It's what you told me to pay attention to before. Nanny Duan followed her with a pale face and a gloomy look. Before she could stand still, she immediately lowered her voice and said to Qin Wanru. What did you find out? Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat. Tomorrow should be the wedding day of Aunt Shui and father. Is it tomorrow? Tomorrow's wedding was a big event and there was no room for mistakes. For tomorrow's wedding, old grandma and Qin Wanru had to go down the mountain later. I found out that those ruffians were secretly talking about smashing the bridal sedan chair, just like what second miss did at the gate of the mansion that day. Nanny Duan wiped the sweat on her forehead. If it weren't for the fact that this matter was so serious that she couldn't make a decision at the moment, she wouldn't want to make trouble in front of old grandma. How dare they? Qin Yu said angrily, aren't they afraid of the general's punishment? They said that they were inspired by the fact that second miss smashed the bridal sedan chair, so they also smashed it. They said that the family that Miss Shui married before didn't allow Miss Shui to remarry. Since Nanny Duan got the news, she had been pacing around in the room. If this matter started from the general's side, there wouldn't be any problem. But if it started from Miss Shui's side, there would really be a problem. Miss Shui was now a widow. If her husband's family really didn't allow them to marry, they would make a scene. Even if the general finally married Miss Shui, the reputation of Miss Shui and the general would be tarnished. Moreover, the general couldn't punish Miss Shui's original husband's family. Otherwise, it would be bad for everyone. They also want to copy me to smash the bridal sedan chair. Qin Wanru smiled. Nanny Duan, is this news reliable? Very reliable. After second miss left that day, I paid special attention and asked 2 people to keep an eye on these ruffians. Both of them came to the same conclusion. Second miss, this should be Madame's idea, right? Nanny Duan hesitated for a moment and still said bluntly. Although second miss didn't seem to grow up and was a little smaller than her, Nanny Duan felt that second miss was sensible and intelligent. It was okay to tell second miss this in advance. Don't ask for grandma, ask for father. You go down the mountain to find father immediately and tell him that these ruffians want to make trouble. Ask father to send people to imprison these ruffians first. Qin Wanru's voice was very gentle, but her words were swift and decisive without any hesitation. We must catch this group of people tonight, in case they make trouble tomorrow. Just tell the general to arrest them without any evidence. After all, there is no real evidence. Although Nanny Duan was knowledgeable, it was the means of the backyard after all. She felt that without evidence, there was no way to convince people. Nanny, if this matter is made known, will it affect father and Aunt Shui? Qin Wanru's little face tightened and she asked seriously. Yes, it will be very serious. In the future, I am afraid that Miss Shui will not be able to raise her head in front of others. The reputation of the general will also be affected. Nanny Duan thought for a moment and said. More than that, if Aunt Shui's family really make trouble and smash the bridal sedan chair, Aunt Shui will lose her face. She will not even have the face to go out in the future. And father, if someone accuses him of this, it will even hinder his official career. Qin Wanru sneered and fluttered her long eyelashes. With these 2 points, it doesn't matter whether there is evidence or not. You just need to tell father about this matter. I believe father will immediately make a decision. For this kind of matter, there was no need for any evidence. As long as there was suspicion, it would be erased immediately. Qin Wanru believed that Qin Huayong still had this courage. Seeing that Qin Wanru said it seriously but looked calm, Nanny Duan also calmed down and nodded. "Second miss, I will not go to see old grandma, but go to see the general directly." "Yes, you go and come back quickly. Just stay with Aunt Shui. I will go down the mountain with grandmother later. But I am afraid it will not be that easy for me and grandmother to go down the mountain." Qin Wanru nodded and a trace of coldness flashed in her watery eyes. Since Madame D had done something to Shui Rulan's marriage, she was afraid that Madame D would not let go of her grandmother. Madame D would not let Shui Rulan marry into the general's mansion. On the one hand, she would start from Shui Rulan, and on the other hand, she would start from her grandmother. "Yes, second miss, then I will go." Nanny Duan also knew that this matter should not be delayed, so she turned around and left in a hurry. Originally, she had no idea and wanted to ask old grandma for advice. Now, after hearing Qin Wanru's words, she immediately knew that it was useless to ask old grandma for this matter. She immediately left Jingxin Monastery, got on the small carriage that she had come here before, and hurried down the mountain. Qin Wanru came to the yard where the carriages of each family were repaired and parked. The carriage of Ningyuan Army General's mansion was already waiting there. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, a coachman hurriedly came forward and saluted. "Second miss, when can old grandma go down the mountain?" "I have prepared everything here." "Everything is ready." Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and asked. Chapter 79. A carriage that was parked beside the general's mansion's carriage tilted in front of everyone's eyes, and then heavily hit the general's mansion's carriage. That carriage was used by old Grandma Chang. Being pressed by the carriage beside it, it couldn't bear the force and tilted to the other carriage. One after another, carriages were knocked to the ground. A series of accidents happened. When everyone finally pulled the carriages apart one by one, they found that the general's mansion's carriage was badly damaged. Especially old grandma's wide carriage, because it was facing the first carriage that was hit, the roof of the carriage was tilted, and the wheels were crushed, so it couldn't sit people at all. As for the other carriages, they were also hit to the side. How could they go down the mountain like this? Qing Yu was dumbfounded. "Second miss, it's because one of the wheels of that carriage fell off, and it couldn't stand still, so it hit the carriage of our mansion." The coachman who came to report to Qin Wanru before ran over with sweat all over his head. They were about to go down the mountain, but such an accident happened. Qin Wanru frowned, and her willowy eyebrows unconsciously became a little cold. "What should we do now?" After a long while, Qin Wanru stretched her willowy eyebrows and asked calmly. Her eyes fell on the carriages that obviously couldn't sit, but she didn't panic at all, as if she didn't know that if the carriages couldn't be used, old grandma couldn't go down the mountain. "Second miss, do you want to borrow a few carriages from others?" The coachman asked with sweat all over his head. "Where can I borrow them?" Qin Wanru said. In fact, there were many carriages parked here, but most of them were very simple oil wall carriages, narrow and small, and not stable. Not to mention that old grandma's identity didn't deserve it. Even if it did, old grandma was still sick now, and Qin Wanru didn't dare to let her sit in such a narrow carriage to go down the mountain. If something really happened, no one could bear the responsibility. I don't know. The coachman who suggested was also very embarrassed. His eyes followed Qin Wanru's gaze, and there was indeed no suitable carriage here. Find a way to pull these broken carriages down the mountain to repair them. Qin Wanru ordered. Yes. Your servant will get the carriage off in a moment. But old madam, what should we do? The coachman was both embarrassed and flustered. He didn't know what to do. You can ask my grandma about it. You can go down the mountain first. Qin Wanru frowned and turned away unhappily, ignoring what happened in the parking lot. Seeing her leaving, Qing Yu hurried to catch up with her. But Qin Wanru stopped when she just turned a corner. "Miss, what do we do now? Old madam should have woken up by now, right?" Qin Yu saw that she stopped and asked anxiously. Just now, young Miss came out from old Madam's place to see if the carriage was ready. But looking at the current situation, the carriage could not be used at all. Since the carriage could not be used, old grandma could not go down the mountain. If old grandma did not show up to preside over the marriage of the general tomorrow, others might spread the rumor. Even Shui Rulan's marriage would not be recognized. Qin Wanru's eyes darkened. Needless to say, this was Madame D's conspiracy. How could the wheels of such a big carriage fall off easily? Thinking of the evasive eyes of the other two coachmen, she knew that this must have something to do with them. In order to make Shui Rulan's marriage unreasonable, Madame D really did a lot of tricks. Grandma's body could not be used by ordinary carriages. But if there was someone else's carriage, they could definitely borrow it. Qin Wanru believed that the carriage would be even more comfortable for grandma than the one in her mansion. The master of Jingshin Monastery had a carriage, a very stable one. In the past, there were wives of big families who came to see the master of Jingshin Monastery. If it was inconvenient for them to go back, they could borrow the master of Jingshin Monastery's carriage. Go to the master of Jingshin Monastery and tell her that I want to borrow her carriage. Qin Wanru said while thinking. There is a carriage in the monastery? It was the first time that Qin Yu knew about it. She opened her eyes wide in surprise. Yes, you can borrow it. Qin Wanru said with a smile. In fact, few people used this carriage. The master of Jingshin Monastery just used it as a spare. After all, big families all had large and stable carriages. Therefore, basically no one knew about it, even Madame Dowager. If Qin Wanru hadn't followed Mingqiu Nun to learn medicine these days and Mingqiu Nun specifically mentioned this spare carriage, she wouldn't have known about it. After sending Qin Yu to borrow the carriage from the master of Jingshin Monastery, Qin Wanru hurried back to old grandma. Old grandma had already stood up and sat there waiting for Qin Wanru to come back. Qin Wanru did not hide it from old grandma and told her about the accident of her carriage in front of her. After she finished her words, old grandma had already understood everything. She coughed in a low voice and looked at Qin Wanru approvingly. While thinking that Madame D was playing tricks again, she also approved of Qin Wanru. This granddaughter had really grown up and was no longer the little girl who had not grown up. The carriage was borrowed soon. This carriage was very big. Because it might be used by patients, the body was also very wide and stable. There were only some simple and practical things, very thick and very soft. When Qin Wanru helped old grandma into the carriage, she found that the carriage was indeed very good. There was a big couch in it. Old grandma lay on it and leaned against it. There was a big window beside the couch, so she would not feel stuffy lying on it. Qin Wanru opened the window and let down the gauze curtain inside. Not only the air was fresh, but also it did not block the view. The carriage was also very stable, even more comfortable than the carriage old grandma used before. Grandma, take a rest first. I will call you when we arrive. Qin Wanru covered old grandma with the quilt and said softly. Old grandma knew that she was not in good health, so she was not too stubborn at this time. She nodded and closed her eyes. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, she would look for Madame D. At this time, she still needed to conserve her energy. The shabby carriages of General's mansion went down the mountain first. Although the carriages were slanted, they could still move as long as they were careful and slow. The carriages drove all the way to the backyard of General's mansion. After the carriage drivers got off the carriage, the coachman who talked to Qin Wanru before went to report to Madame D. Hearing that the coachman came back, but old grandma and Qin Wanru did not go down the mountain, a proud smile appeared on Madame D's tense face. Did second miss say anything? Madame D asked worriedly. She always felt that this girl was not so easy to worry about. Second miss said there was nothing she could do. She just asked us to pull the carriage down and repair it, the coachman reported proudly. She didn't ask you to pull it back immediately? Madame D asked. This carriage is already like this, how can we pull it back immediately? Even if second miss said it, we know how to answer. The coachman became more and more proud. His words made Madame D happy. She picked up the tea beside her and took a sip. She waved her hand and asked the coachman to leave. Nanny Zhou was a smart person. When she left with the coachman, she purposely gave him a hush money. The coachman thanked her and said a lot of words of gratitude before he left. After the coachman left, Nanny Zhou went back into the room. Let's see how this girl can solve it this time. Madame D could not hold back the smile on her face. Madam, you've used two methods at the same time. Even a cunning adult can't do anything, not to mention second miss is still an ignorant girl. Nanny Zhou smiled and flattered Madame D. What she said was actually what she was thinking. This time, no matter what second miss tried, she could not solve the trap set by Madame D. Shui Rulan wants to marry the general openly. She doesn't know if she has the life to do so. She is just a widow. She really thinks she is so great. I want her to become the scandal of the whole Jiangzhou. So what if the general agrees to marry her? Qin Wanru is not the only one who can smash the bridal sedan chair. I can do it too. Madame D said complacently. A trace of viciousness flashed in her eyes. Qin Wanru smashed Qi Tianyu's bridal sedan chair gave her a lot of inspiration. Since Qin Wanru smashed it, it was not a big deal for her to let others smash it. Moreover, it was Shui Rulan's in-laws who smashed the bridal sedan chair. Even if Qin Huayong was extremely powerful in Jiangzhou, he could not stop people from talking. At that time, he would be anxious to explain this matter and would not care whether it was really Shui Rulan's in-laws. At this time, if old grandma did not show up, it was expected that she would suppress this marriage on the grounds that old grandma was not here and the marriage did not count. Old grandma did not admit it and she did not agree. Even if Shui Rulan married into the mansion, she could not be regarded as a wife. She could only be a concubine. Moreover, with such a big matter, Qin Huayong could not afford to lose face. At most, he would give her the position of a concubine. At that time, even if old grandma came down from the mountain, it would be too late. If Shui Rulan was just a concubine, he could do whatever he wanted with her in the future. Even if old grandma wanted to protect Shui Rulan's health was not something that could be protected easily. Is the person you chose okay? Madame D said and looked at Nanny Zhou worriedly. Don't worry, madam. My nephew is a reliable person. Even if something happens, madam will not be involved. His family and I can only be regarded as a distant relative. We haven't been in contact for many years. But I used to feel sorry for him and helped him when he was young. So I know him very well. Nanny Zhou patted her chest and promised. That's good. This time the accident has nothing to do with me and I don't intend to intervene. You can give the general whatever he wants in the mansion. Remember, don't stop him. I want to see how he wants to get married this time. Madame D said with a cold face and gritted teeth. She had prepared everything for Qin Huayong, but if there were any other problems in this marriage, it would have nothing to do with her. Yes, madam, I understand. Nanny Zhou understood tacitly and said. When they were talking, a servant girl ran into the yard in a hurry. Hearing that Madame D and Nanny Zhou were talking in the room, she ran to the door and said loudly, Madam, please go to pick up old grandma. Has she come back? Who came back? The two people in the room were stunned. After looking at each other, Nanny Zhou asked in surprise. It was impossible for someone to come back. How could it be possible? Chapter 80. Mother, why didn't you use the carriage from our mansion? After Qin Huayong helped old grandma to get off the carriage, he looked at the nun who got off before old grandma, and his face was full of surprise. The carriage is broken. Old grandma had a good rest, and her face was not bad. Broken? What happened? Qin Huayong was stunned for a moment, and frowned. He had a bad feeling. I don't know either. I only heard that when Zhuozhuo went to look at the carriages, she happened to see that one of the carriage's wheels had slipped off. What was even more coincidental was that the carriage with the broken wheel had smashed all the other carriages in our mansion. I almost couldn't come and preside over your marriage with Rulin tomorrow. The old madam said in an indifferent tone. Qin Huayong's face changed, and when he was about to say something, he suddenly heard Madame D's voice from outside. Mother, you finally came. Just now the carriage driver came back and said that the carriage was broken, and I was going to find another carriage to pick you up. After saying this, Madame D suddenly rushed into the door, and wiped her face with a handkerchief. It could be seen that she left in a hurry. You already know that Mother's carriage was broken? Qin Huayong said to Madame D with an unkind face. Why didn't I know? General, I was in a hurry to find another carriage for Mother, and I forgot to tell you. I originally wanted to find a suitable carriage, and then go up the mountain with you overnight to pick Mother up. Madame D smiled with a happy face. Fortunately, the master of Jingxin Monastery not only has a carriage, but also has someone who can drive the carriage, otherwise it would be troublesome. She had already inquired clearly on the way here, and now seeing a nun standing beside old grandma, how could she not know that it was the master of Jingxin Monastery who spoiled things? She gritted her teeth in hatred, but had to pretend to be grateful. Qin Wanru smiled on the side and looked at Madame D's embarrassed look. Things happened one after another. Even if her father trusted Madame D before, his trust in her would be discounted now. If there were no practical measures, Qin Huayong would not believe her, and she could not send him away with just a few words. Sure enough, Qin Huayong's next words made the smile on Madame D's face stiff. What did you do? Where did you borrow the carriage? When are you going to tell me that we're going up the mountain to pick up my mother? Qin Huayong's questions were thrown out one after another in annoyance. Madame D's stiff face could not be seen at all. Nanny Zhou hurriedly helped Madame D to explain. General, it just happened. Madame and I are discussing to borrow a carriage from another madam who is on good terms with us. The best carriage in our mansion belongs to old grandma. Now it's broken and we can't take it. Which family is B? If it had been in the past, Qin Huayong would have been satisfied with what she had said. But now, he had no intention of giving in. He said coldly, staring sharply at Madame D's face, and said impolitely, Madame D, don't say that you are only thinking at this stage and have not actually done anything. General, how can you say that about me? Look, I don't care about anything you do. Even if you want to marry Shui Rulin, I will do whatever you want. I will give you whatever you want. Is there any delay? But look at your attitude towards me now. Is it possible that I, the old one, will be like this before the new one comes into the family? Madame D stammered. Suddenly, she burst into tears. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief and scolded Qin Huayong. General, I know you are angry with me because of Yuru, but what can I do? Yuru is my daughter, my biological daughter. How can I just watch her fall into such a state without doing anything? I am wrong, but it is also for our daughter. General, can't you understand me? Madame D became more and more aggrieved as she said. She raised her face and looked at Qin Huayong with tears in her eyes. General, I have never done anything wrong when I was with you. But I did make a mistake on Yuru's matter. But General, you can't completely destroy my past. I gave up my life in the capital city and followed you to live such a life of distrust. It seemed that she remembered what she had suffered in the past. Madame D cried so hard that she almost became a tearful person. She was a miss from an aristocratic family, but she didn't break the engagement and married Qin Huayong. This matter was indeed worth mentioning in front of Qin Huayong. After all, it was not a good marriage for Qin Huayong in front of Duke Yong's mansion at that time. Her words implied that she had married a man of low status at that time. As soon as she said this, Qin Huayong's face eased a little, and he was no longer aggressive. Mother, don't you like Aunt Shui? Seeing that she deliberately changed the topic and talked about something that made Qin Huayong feel grateful to Duke Yong's mansion, Qin Wanru raised her beautiful eyes and asked with a little naivety on her face. Qin Huayong's face changed greatly after hearing her words. He looked at Madame D suspiciously. Could it be that Madame D's crying was just to distract his attention? When Nanny Duan came to report, he had already sent someone to deal with it. He knew that someone secretly targeted Shui Rulan, and the most suspicious person was Madame D. However, before he could find out the truth, the carriage was destroyed. The carriage was destroyed, of course, his mother couldn't go down the mountain. If Madame D used this to make trouble tomorrow, and combined with the smashing of the bridal sedan chair, he would have no time to deal with the affairs in the mansion if he had to explain to others. At that time, Shui Rulan came in, but her status didn't follow. In fact, the result was self-evident. Sure enough, all these things were caused by Madame D behind. Suddenly, the matter that Madame D sent someone to plot against Qin Wanru flashed in his mind, and the coldness in the corner of his eyes overflowed uncontrollably. Did he have any thoughts about this woman? He was almost cheated by her again just now. Wanru, I know you don't like me, and I know you have been wronged because of your big sister. But don't be angry, I will apologize to you. I just hope you won't go against me in the future. Now I just want to atone for my sins. Madame D felt bad in her heart, and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. She looked at Qin Wanru and was about to kneel to her, as if she regretted doing something wrong and now Qin Wanru could do whatever she wanted. Qin Wanru couldn't stand it when Madame D wanted to kneel. She hurriedly turned away, and a neat old maid beside old grandma hurried to help her. But this time, Madame D seemed to really want to kneel to apologize. Even if the old maid pulled her, she still wanted to kneel. It was a mess of pulling and pulling. Grandma, are you tired? Do you want to take a rest first? Qin Wanru retreated to old grandma and whispered to her, frowning. Old grandma understood. She reached out and pressed her head, leaned back weakly, and closed her eyes. She whispered to Qin Wanru, Zhuozhua, help me into the inner room to rest. This is a mess, and I really don't have the strength to listen to it. Let your father solve it himself. After saying this, she coughed heavily. Seeing old grandma's weak look, and looking at Madame D's incessant noise, Qin Huayong was angry. He reached out and slammed the table, making the tea set on the table jump up and make a crisp sound. Are you done? If you are, go back. Don't deliberately make any more trouble. He thought of all the things Madame D had done, and the more he looked at her, the more he disliked her. General, you. Madame D, who was in the middle of making a scene, was startled by Qin Huayong and stuttered. You should stay in your own yard tomorrow and don't come out. In case of any accidents later. Qin Huayong said coldly. Things happened one after another, and every one of them seemed to be related to Madame D. Even if there was no evidence, he could guess that she was the one who did it, and she would always be the one who benefited. If it wasn't for what happened in Jingxin Monastery, Qin Huayong might not think that she was the one who did all these things. Now he realized that since she was so vicious that she would even kidnap Qin Wanru, what else would she not do? Someone secretly plotted against Shui Rulan, and deliberately smashed the carriage so that old grandma could not go down the mountain to preside over tomorrow's marriage. It was easy to say that Madame D was responsible for it. General, how could you do this to me? Madame D was shocked. If she couldn't attend the marriage tomorrow, what would others say about her? How could she have the face to visit other mansions in the future? Someone, invite Madame to have a rest. Let her have a good rest these days. Qin Huayong said with a livid face. Hearing what he said, two inferior old maids came to old grandma and pulled Madame D out. Nanny Zhou wanted to pull them away, but when she saw Qin Huayong's face, she didn't dare to go forward. She could only follow Madame D and persuade her while chasing after her. The people brought by Madame D also hurriedly followed them, and the room suddenly became quiet. "Mother, I'll have to trouble you with tomorrow's matters." Qin Huayong took a deep breath and said again. "Yong, don't worry. Although I'm old, I can still manage for one day." "But what about in the future?" Old Grandma sighed, and her heart was also full of confusion. "In the future, let cousin rule and manage." Qin Huayong's eyebrows twitched. At this time, he had made up his mind. He looked at Qin Wanru beside him and made up his mind. Madame D couldn't get divorced, but it didn't mean that he had to serve her like before. For the sake of Duke Yong's mansion, he could give her the dignity of a legal wife, but only the dignity in the eyes of outsiders. "Aren't you afraid of what Duke Yong's mansion will say?" In fact, old Grandma also had worries. So for so many years, when facing Madame D, she could only give in with the excuse that she didn't manage. "Mother, don't worry." Qin Huayong comforted old Grandma. "It's good that you know what you're doing. There is no problem with Rulin, but..." Old Grandma still had some scruples, and she didn't continue. "Father, will Duke Yong embarrass you and Aunt Shui because of this?" Qin Wanru said appropriately. She frowned and looked worried. "Father, will Duke Yong embarrass you and Aunt Shui?" Qin Huayong immediately understood. They were going to return to the capital city soon, and at that time, Duke Yong's mansion would definitely ask for an explanation. Qin Wanru's words reminded Qin Huayong, and he immediately promised old Grandma, "Mother, don't worry. There are some things, I will make early preparations." Duke Yong's mansion would definitely seek revenge if they mistreated the daughter of Duke Yong's mansion. In this case, witnesses, evidence, and as for the person who wanted to ruin this time, after he found out who he was, he would also send him to the capital city. Chapter 81. Qin Huayong was going to get married again. This was big news among the officials in Jiangzhou. There was too much news about Ningyuan Army General's mansion recently, and all of them were very strange. So when they heard that Qin Huayong was going to get married, many people kept a wait-and-see attitude. Madame D was the noble lady of Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city, and nobody could bully her. At first, people didn't understand why Qin Huayong would do such a thing to make Duke Yong's mansion angry. But after the rumor that came out of Jingxin Monastery that day was spread to the whole Jiangzhou city, people suddenly understood Qin Huayong. It was not good to marry a wife, and because of Duke Yong's mansion in the capital city, it was not convenient for him to divorce her, so it was reasonable to marry an old mother and young daughter to take care of him. Moreover, he was framed by Madame D and had to marry into the general's mansion. Ningyuan Army General was a good man, but he had no choice but to have such a wife. Thinking of Qin Huayong's suffering, many officials in Jiangzhou felt wronged for him. Who could imagine that Madame D, who looked gentle and elegant, was actually so vicious? Because she didn't like Second Miss, who was not her biological daughter, she even sent people to kidnap Second Mississippi. How vicious was she to do such a thing? Even though she was not her biological daughter, she had always treated her as her biological mother. For a moment, many people felt pity for Qin Wanru, especially some madams who had met Qin Wanru. They all thought that Second Miss Qin was naive and cute, but in general, she was a child. Although she was already 11 years old, she was still very childish. However, even though he was very childish, he was still a likable child. Everyone thought that Madame D was too vicious. Especially Madame Li, the wife of Magistrate Qi, talked about this matter everywhere she went. On the one hand, she lamented that Second Miss Qin was so pitiful to have such a mother, and on the other hand, she scolded Madame D for being vicious. She didn't want other people's daughters to have a good life when her own daughter couldn't have a good life. Second Miss Qin was like this, and so was her own daughter. They were all killed by Madame D's vicious intention. When Qin Wanru heard the rumors outside, she was very calm. She had asked Nanny Duan to send someone to spread the rumor outside, and what she saw in Jingshin Monastery said, so as to spread the rumor to as many people as possible. As a result, everyone was happy to see Qin Huayong marrying Shui Ruolan. No one thought that Qin Huayong had any evidence to be used against him for marrying Shui Ruolan. Even Madame Li, the wife of Magistrate Jiang, repeatedly said that Shui Ruolan was a gentle person. She was framed and had to marry into General's mansion because of Madame Dowager and Qin Wanru. If it were not for Madame D, she would still be a widow and had few desires. With Madame Li's testimony, everyone had a better impression of Shui Ruolan's character. Early in the morning, Qin Huayong took the bridal sedan to pick up the guests. There were many guests in the inner courtyard of the mansion. Madame Dowager was in good spirits and presided over the wedding in the backyard. Qin Wanru helped her to receive the young ladies of similar age. Madame Dowager was very thoughtful. She was afraid that the young ladies would feel uncomfortable when all the madams were there, so she specially arranged for Qin Wanru to receive the young ladies in another flower hall. Everyone thought that Qin Huayong's marriage was a good thing. There were many people and many young ladies. In Jiangzhou, Ningyuan Army General and Magistrate Qi had the highest status. Qi Rongji didn't come, so Qin Wanru's status was the noblest. There were many young ladies who were friends with her in the past. Most of the young ladies who were friends with Qin Yuru didn't come today. But they didn't come, and the young ladies who came felt very comfortable. "Second miss, are you really not your mother's biological daughter?" A young lady sitting next to Qin Wanru blinked twice, leaned over and asked curiously. She blinked her eyes and looked at Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru knew her. She was the youngest daughter of Yu Xing, one of Qin Huayong's deputy generals. Her name was Yu Yuqing. She was really young, a few months younger than Qin Wanru. She was only 10 years old, but she looked taller than Qin Wanru. When they stood together, Qin Wanru was half a head shorter than her, so she looked like a younger sister. There were too many rumors about Qin Wanru's background. In fact, many young ladies present were very curious about it. But they were too embarrassed to ask, so the youngest Yu Yuqing took the lead. At this time, 7 or 8 young ladies of the same age blinked their eyes and looked at Qin Wanru curiously. Really not. Qin Wanru shook her head. Her white and tender face wrinkled, and her pink lips were tightly pressed together. She looked a little pitiful. Then, who is your biological mother? She was too young to know much. Yu Yuqing couldn't help but ask another question that everyone wanted to ask. I don't know. Qin Wanru shook her head. The 2 buns on her head shook twice, and then she lowered her head. How could you not know? Didn't you ask your father? General must know, right? Yu Yuqing became more and more curious. She blinked her eyes and continued to rub salt on the wound immaturely. Although the young ladies around strained their ears to listen, they were sighing in their hearts. After all, she was too young to know anything. There is no trace of my mother's life in the mansion. I have asked many people, but they all said they had never seen my mother. It seemed that I suddenly appeared in the mansion. Qin Wanru lowered her head and looked listless. How could it be? Several young ladies couldn't help exclaiming. In fact, everyone guessed that Qin Wanru's mother was a concubine of Qin Huayong. Qin Huayong didn't live in Jiangzhou before. When he came to Jiangzhou, he took 2 daughters with him. So no one really knew Qin Wanru's background. It's true. I don't know who my mother is, what is her identity, and why she left me. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly, and her voice became lower and lower. But it didn't hinder the hearing of those young ladies who strained their ears to listen. Hearing her words, everyone looked at each other. Are you not General Qin's biological daughter? A young lady thought for a while and suddenly said on a whim. No way. Qin Wanru raised her head. Her eyes were blank and ignorant. She looked a little dull, as if she was stunned by such a big guess. General Qin loves second Miss so much. How could she not be his biological daughter? Another young lady immediately stood on Qin Wanru's side and spoke for her. She just found out that she was not Madame D's biological daughter. If she said that she was not General Qin's biological daughter, how pitiful second Miss Qin would be. I'm just guessing and talking nonsense. Don't take it seriously. The main thing is that you don't have a biological mother. It's really suspicious. Second Miss Qin, is there anything special about your mother? The previous young lady also felt that her guess was too far from reality. She smiled awkwardly and hurriedly comforted Qin Wanru. I don't know. Qin Wanru shook her head. It's really strange, how could she suddenly lose her biological mother? Yu Yuqing murmured on the side, and suddenly her eyes lit up. Second Miss Qin, are you an abandoned child that General Qin picked up and raised? Qin Wanru raised her head, and her beautiful eyes turned red. I'm talking nonsense. I'm talking nonsense. I'm just talking nonsense. Yu Yuqing saw her wronged look and hurriedly waved her hand. Well, let's stop guessing here. Today is a big day for General's mansion. Second Miss Qin will have a mother in the future. I heard that Miss Shui is gentle and will take good care of second Miss Qin in the future. Let's not worry about it. Some older and more mature young ladies came out to smooth things over. Today was a big day for General Qin's mansion, and they shouldn't make second Miss Qin sad. Otherwise, they would be scolded when they go home. Immediately, many people comforted Qin Wanru. After a while, Qin Wanru was comforted by them and happily took them to the garden. Sometimes guessing was close to the truth. Although it was inconvenient for the young ladies to say anything now, it didn't prevent them from telling their father what happened today. Qin Wanru had doubts about her life experience, and she didn't know how to find out. So she threw a golden hook first. Not to mention whether she could catch a fish or not, she just wanted to send a message. At this time, it was said that the bridal sedan chair was in front of the door. All the young ladies wanted to watch the fun, so Qin Wanru took them out from the backyard and secretly went to the front yard. There were many people at this time, so no one noticed that several young ladies had sneaked out. But even if they saw it, it was not a big deal. On a big day, the rules were relaxed. Qin Wanru stood behind a pillar and watched Qin Huayong holding a red silk and walking in with Shui Rulan. She rubbed the handkerchief in her hand, and a trace of deep and excited flashed in her eyes. In her previous life, Shui Rulan also fell into such a miserable situation because of her. This time, she wanted to see her happy and protect her to give birth to her children. Qin Huayong's stern face in the past showed a gentle smile. It could be seen that he was also satisfied with Shui Rulan. When they entered the hall, they bowed in the singing of the bridesmaid. Old grandma on the high seat saw them bowing to her, and her eyes turned red. Then she smiled, and it could be seen that she was in a good mood. After that, the newlyweds were sent in. Old grandma reached out and waved to Qin Wanru, who was hiding on the side. Qin Wanru smiled and ran over. Zhuozhuo, why are you hiding? Old grandma said with a smile. It seemed that she was in a good mood and coughed less. To see father and Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru leaned on old grandma and said with a face full of admiration. Don't call her Aunt Shui, call her mother. Old grandma patted her head and said. How should I call her before? Qin Wanru pouted and hesitated for a moment. I have discussed it with your father. Just call her Madam. Speaking of Madam D, the smile on old grandma's face faded a little. Okay, Grandma, Zhuozhuo will listen to Grandma. Qin Wanru smiled, and her little face was like a blooming flower. At that moment, people felt that she really smiled from the heart. Chapter 82. Qin Wanru helped Madame Dowager into the flower hall and then came out again. Standing outside the flower hall, Qin Wanru took a breath. There were many guests today and Madame Dowager was not in good health. Qin Wanru was worried that Madame Dowager could not hold on. Fortunately, it was almost noon and the wedding banquet was about to begin. After the banquet, the guests would basically go back. Jiangzhou was slightly different from other places. The wedding banquet was held at noon and only some close friends would stay until the evening. The number of guests was relatively small. Second Mississippi, someone was pulling her clothes and the voice was sharp and thin. Qin Wanru looked back in surprise and her eyes fell on the servant behind her. The servant in the clothes of General's mansion wore a red-lined jacket today. She could tell at a glance that he was different from the servants brought by other guests. The servant in front of her was a little familiar. Second Miss, our master wants you to go over. The servant lowered his voice and pointed to the right front. Qin Wanru saw another servant in that direction. Seeing the handsome face of a proud young man who walked out of the ink landscape, Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes immediately. What clothes was he wearing? Second Miss, hurry up. Our master is going to be angry. Xiao Xuanzi lowered his voice and pointed to his child whose cheeks were slightly puffed up. Qin Wanru looked around and turned around helplessly. Chu Luqian stood in the corridor, and there was a small rockery under the corridor, which happened to block half of his figure. In addition, he was wearing the clothes of a manservant of the general's mansion, so it was not very abrupt for him to come and go in the inner court in such a busy situation today. Along the way, he just slightly lowered his head. With Xiao Xuanzi's clever answers, no one found that they were two outsiders. Child, why are you here? Qin Wanru came to him and asked in a low voice. Why? I can't come. What are you hiding in General's mansion that you can't let me see? Chu Luqian impatiently reached out and pulled Qin Wanru to sit beside him. The railing in the corridor was a very leisurely place. Qin Wanru did not expect that he would suddenly reach out his hand. She staggered a few steps and sat down heavily. She sat so fast that it hurt a little, and her beautiful willowy eyebrows knitted together. What? Are you unhappy? How dare you disrespect me? Chu Luqian snorted and raised his handsome face, looking at Qin Wanru with displeasure. Wang Ye, I don't have time to accompany you now. Only Grandma and I can receive you in the backyard. Qin Wanru said in a low voice patiently. Am I not a guest? Chu Luqian said with an unfriendly look. His words made Qin Wanru speechless. After a while, she looked at the servant's clothes on him. She really didn't think that a man who wore a servant's clothes and sneaked into the mansion was her guest. Your Highness, your clothes. Where did it come from? Qin Wanru knew that she might not be able to leave for a while. Ask Xiao Xuanzi to get it. Chu Luqian said matter-of-factly. He stretched out his hand and pulled his clothes with some disgust. The manservant's clothes were messy and crooked, which made him look even less like a well-behaved manservant. Why didn't you tell father that you wanted to come to see the fun? Father didn't allow you to see it? Qin Wanru looked at him in confusion. Although it was a secret that Chu Luqian came to Jiangzhou, father must know about it. As for why he said that he wanted to see the fun, it was obvious that he didn't have anything important to do. What else could he do if he didn't want to see the fun? Every time he wanted to see the fun, he would find a place with a wide view early. It should be the same this time. I want to see it by myself secretly. Chu Luqian leaned back and became lazy. The servant's clothes on him looked a little more elegant. How could he enter the yard without being discovered? Qin Wanru felt strange. How did he look like a servant? What do you want to do next, Wang Ye? Qin Wanru bit her pink lips and asked carefully. Since he was here, he should solve the problem that he could go back after watching the fun. I want to see the bridal chamber. Chu Luqian stretched out his hand and flicked his sleeves. He squinted at Qin Wanru and smiled gently and politely. However, the meaning of his words was far from being gentle and polite. Xiao Xuanzi was so shocked that his eyes were wide open. Master, you don't follow the rules. You can't go. Follow the rules? Then when can I go to see the bridal chamber according to the rules? Chu Luqian smiled and his voice was light and sarcastic. Qin Wanru didn't know how to continue. He was so obsessed with watching the bridal chamber that he felt so wronged. Will you take me with you or not? I remember that you promised to take me on a tour around Jiangzhou. Chu Luqian blinked his beautiful eyes and said accusingly, are you going to break your promise? Break my promise? Qin Wanru really didn't dare to. Even if she wanted to, she didn't dare to say so directly. He groaned in his heart. He was already busy enough today, and this person was just here to cause trouble. However, he just couldn't be coaxed away. Now that he had been pulled over, if he didn't bring him over, he wouldn't let him pass through the door. In fact, she would rather accompany her grandmother to entertain the guests than accompany this arrogant and beautiful young man. This person looked weak and harmless, but who knew when he would suddenly cause trouble? Who knew if he would mess up her father's wedding banquet? Well, since you don't want to, I don't care. I will go and see it myself. Chu Luqian didn't seem to be surprised by her reaction. He stood up and shook his crooked servant clothes. He was going to walk forward, as if he was going to enter the busy crowd in front. Qin Wanru was shocked and subconsciously pulled his sleeves. Child, wait a minute. What? You don't let me go? Chu Luqian squinted at her and his voice became lazy. Child, I will go with you. Qin Wanru gritted her teeth and made up her mind. She would rather keep an eye on this troublemaker than let him get into trouble in her mansion. Otherwise, he would cause other troubles. It was better for her to be here than not. Thinking about this, Qin Wanru also stood up and pulled Chu Luqian's sleeves to retreat. Let's go there. There are fewer people there, and it can lead to the bridal chamber. Okay. Chu Luqian smiled. Chu Luqian smiled. He seemed to be much more obedient, like a well-behaved boy. Of course, Qin Wanru knew that these were all appearances. This man was not a well-behaved and obedient master. No matter what kind of beautiful and gentle expression he showed on the surface, it was just to confuse people. If people really dared to provoke him, they must be extremely poisonous. She pulled Chu Luqian to hide behind the cloister. In this position, even if they stood outside the cloister, no one would necessarily find them. Child, you can go and have a look, but after that, you must leave immediately, okay? Qin Wanru was still worried, so she specially told him and began to talk about conditions with him. Okay, it's all up to you. Chu Luqian was rarely easy to talk to. The expression on his face was always smiling, and it seemed that he was in a good mood. Child, can you have a look at the back of the room? It is against the rules for a servant to enter the bridal chamber directly. Qin Wanru looked up and down Chu Luqian and said. In the past, servants were not allowed to enter the backyard. Even if there were special circumstances, they could only enter the backyard with the master's order. Of course, Qin Wanru was excluded. After all, she was still young and ignorant. In the past, when she wanted to ask Nanny Yu's son Wang Feng to do something, she had to ask Nanny Yu or Qing Yu to pass the message to the outer court. Back of the room. What are you looking at? Chu Luqian was unhappy again. He pulled his sleeves which were pulled by Qin Wanru and wanted to leave. Qin Wanru hurriedly pulled his sleeves tightly. Child, if you wear the clothes of a servant girl, I can take you to see the bridal chamber from the front door. What? You want me to wear women's clothes? Chu Luqian's delicate and handsome face was a little dark. Qin Wanru suddenly felt that if this child wore women's clothes and dressed up, he should also be extremely beautiful. Looking at his pale lips, he might be a pitiful beauty who made people feel sorry for him. For a moment, she couldn't help smiling and couldn't help laughing. In fact, with his color, it was quite suitable for him to dress up as a woman. What? Do you want to see me dress up as a woman? Chu Luchen smiled very gently, with a trace of his own elegance and nobility. No, how dare I? I just think that if we want to go to the bridal chamber from the front, we can only do this. If father finds out, I'm afraid that even child can't attend the ceremony. Qin Wanru immediately became serious and said seriously. However, a pair of beautiful curved eyes and a clear smile at the bottom of her eyes made people know that she was actually smiling at this time. The corners of her lips were curved, and her long eyelashes fluttered twice, revealing a light pink jade-like skin. A smile rose from the bottom of her heart, not the kind of smile that she used to politely greet people in the past. It made people feel comfortable to see it. Xiao Xuanzi on the side looked at his master anxiously, for fear that he would get angry. If he really got angry, no one could stop him. It was estimated that only the words of the Empress Dowager in the palace would be heard by his master. But now they were not in the palace, and it was impossible to find the Empress Dowager. He was really afraid that his master would make trouble regardless of anything. What can we see in the back? Chu Luchen smiled, and his eyes also narrowed. He was not angry, which made Xiao Xuanzi, who was on guard on the side, secretly breathed a sigh of relief. You may see a lot, and you are not afraid of being found out. After you see the bridal chamber, you can even go to other interesting places to see. Qin Wanru raised her small face and said seriously. As for other interesting places, of course, she was just talking about it. Okay, I will go to the back with you to see the bridal chamber. As for other interesting places, take me to see them later. Chu Luchen bent his lips, moved his head close to Qin Wanru's ear, and whispered, You have to guarantee that I have not played in other interesting places. Chapter 83. The location of the bridal chamber was the courtyard where Shui Rulin used to live. The courtyards of Madame D and Madame D were located on both sides of Old Grandma's courtyard. In the backyard of General's mansion, the largest main courtyard was Madame D's courtyard, which could be regarded as the courtyard in the middle. Old Grandma lived in the courtyard on the left, and Shui Rulin's courtyard was a little further to the left of Old Grandma's courtyard. In fact, it was already very far to the left. Shui Rulin herself still wanted to live in the courtyard where she had always lived. Although it was a little too far and too quiet, Shui Rulin liked it very much. Qin Wanru was very familiar with Shui Rulin's courtyard. Her own courtyard was on the right rear of Shui Rulin's courtyard. In the past, she was also close to Shui Rulin and liked to go to Shui Rulin's courtyard when she had nothing to do. It was closer to Shui Rulin's courtyard from Qin Wanru's courtyard through the back door. In order to facilitate Qin Wanru's access, the back door of Shui Rulin's courtyard was often open. Qin Wanru took Chu Luchen to the back door after a big circle. Qin Yu stepped forward and pushed it gently. The door was indeed open. They then entered the courtyard from the back door. There were not many people in Shui Rulin's courtyard in the past. This time, there were a few new people and some helpers. However, they were all busy in the front, and no one noticed that there were several people coming from the back of the bridal chamber. Qin Wanru never thought that she would be so unruly as to lie on the back window of the bridal chamber. She was so short that she couldn't see clearly. Qin Yu half held her up and let her lie on the window. Chu Luchen was one step ahead of her. He leaned on the window and watched with relish. When Qin Wanru climbed to the window and looked inside, the look on her face became strange. She really didn't think there was anything to see. It was very quiet in the bridal chamber. Shui Rulin sat on the red wedding bed, and the red veil on her head had been taken off. There was no one in the bridal chamber at this time, only two serving maids with red eyes. Then, there was nothing else. There was really nothing to see. The back window where they were at was hung with a gauze curtain. Their faces were close to the gauze curtain, so the people inside did not pay attention and would not find them at the back window. Qin Wanru watched for a while and found that the people inside did not move at all. Shui Rulan lowered her head and was very quiet. The serving maid also did not move. Qin Wanru really felt that it was not nice at all. She reached out and gently pulled Chu Liuchen's sleeves. Chu Liuchen ignored her, so she pulled again. She used so much strength that Qin Yu couldn't stand it and swayed. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out and grabbed the windowsill. She turned back and signaled Qin Yu to carry her down. She didn't want to see it anymore. Qin Yu understood. She held her waist carefully and moved down slowly. "General." The servant girl's voice suddenly came from the room. Qin Wanru panicked and almost fell down. She hurriedly reached out to grab something to stabilize her body. Why was his father here at this time? Shouldn't he be accompanying the guests at the wedding banquet? In her panic, she didn't care what she was pulling on and just pulled on it with all her might. Chu Liuchen was watching with great interest. Suddenly, his clothes were pulled at his waist. He didn't pay attention, and his body was pulled backward. It was too late for Xiao Xuanzi to catch him, and the two of them fell heavily. "Who is it?" Qin Huayong's roar came from the room, and then heavy footsteps came to the back window. Qin Wanru hurriedly pulled Chu Liuchen and climbed up. She trotted a few steps and jumped into the empty fish tank on the wall of the back courtyard. Qing Yu and Xiao Xuanzi followed suit and also jumped into another empty fish tank. Shui Rulan had 2 large fish tanks, which were given to her by Qin Wanru. There was an illusion in this. Qin Wanru once went out and saw a family raising water lilies in a large fish tank. There were fish under the water lilies, which were very beautiful and elegant. Qin Wanru was tempted and planned to raise a few tanks in spring. She especially persuaded old grandma to buy 4 large tanks. 2 were given to Shui Rulan, and the other 2 were left in her yard. But it was not the best time to raise water lilies, so they were empty now. Such a large tank was just right for 2 people to squeeze in. Qin Wanru's hand was still holding Chu Liuchen's sleeve tightly. She leaned her head against the side of the tank and listened nervously to the voices outside. The sound of the window being opened was followed by footsteps. It was Shui Rulan's soft voice. "Cousin, what's wrong?" "Nothing, I may have misheard." Qin Huayong's eyes fell on the empty backyard and he frowned. Did he really mishear the sound just now? Shui Rulan actually heard the sound, so she followed them. Hearing Qin Huayong's words, she also looked out of the window. It was very quiet outside and there was nothing. She must have misheard. Qin Huayong calmly reached out and pulled down the curtain. "Cousin, you can eat first. I'll ask the kitchen to prepare some light food for you, which is similar to what you usually eat." "Thank you, cousin." Shui Rulan blushed. From now on, he was no longer her cousin, but her husband. Looking at her blushing face, Qin Huayong's heart skipped a beat. He reached out to hold her hand and led her back to the bed to sit down. "I'm going to entertain guests later. I don't have time to accompany you. If you are tired, you can take a rest." I know." Shui Rulan lowered her head and blushed. Although she had been married, the person in front of her was different. He was Qin Huayong, who grew up with her. Some childhood memories that were unknown to others also came to her mind. They were somewhat familiar, but also somewhat strange. But whether they were familiar or strange memories, they all made her feel shy. "Rulan, I have to trouble you with the backyard in the future. Don't blame me." Qin Huayong held Shui Rulan's hand and sighed. "Cousin, I know. I will do my best to help you manage the backyard." Shui Rulan said, "And I will take good care of Mother and Wanru." Nanny Duan had already told Shui Rulan what had happened before and revealed Madame D's vicious plot. So she also knew that Madame D was grounded by Qin Huayong after the incident and she was not allowed to show her face in public on today's big day. Mother is old, and Wanru is still young. Madame D can raise her. Qin Huayong said again. There were some things that he wanted to make clear now, so as to avoid trouble in the future. Yuru is Madame D's daughter after all. Besides, Duke Yong's mansion has the grace of marrying her. With these things, even he had to be scrupulous. Besides, there were some meanings related to the background of the officialdom. Qin Huayong was a little inconvenient to tell Shui Rulan in detail, so he could only vaguely blame it on the kindness of marrying her. As Qin Huayong said, he lowered his head in shame. He also had a great selfishness. Cousin, don't say it. I understand it all. Shui Rulan said softly. There was no trace of grievance in her expression. She was dignified and quiet. Now that I have married you, I will naturally follow your lead. At home, I will be filial to mother and take care of Wanru. I will listen to you outside. For Yuru, I should also stay. Hearing Shui Rulan's reasonable words, Qin Huayong felt relieved. He reached out to hold Shui Rulan in his arms and didn't know what to say for a moment. He had scruples and selfishness. There were some words that he really couldn't say. Hearing that Shui Rulan was so considerate of him and didn't aggressively ask for a clear answer, he was very grateful. Originally, he had a lot of affection for Shui Rulan. This time, he married a beautiful woman who was so reasonable. Qin Huayong's stern face couldn't help but show a smile. He even didn't care so much about the sound that he heard from the back window just now. Qin Huayong and Shui Rulan talked in a low voice. This time, because the topic was not so serious, their voices were very light. Qin Wanru in the big vat couldn't hear clearly. She put her head on the vat and wanted to listen, but her body was suddenly pulled down and hit Chu Luchen. Qin Wanru was shocked and hurriedly turned back. Her pink cherry lips rubbed Chu Luchen's handsome face that came close. Both of them were stunned for a moment. Qin Wanru hurriedly turned back, and her little face suddenly turned red. She reached out and subconsciously pinched Chu Luchen. A pinch. Hey, why did you pinch me? Chu Luchen was not happy and whispered. He reached out to grab Qin Wanru's little hand that was messing around and shook it hard. His grip was so strong that Qin Wanru was so painful that her tears were about to fall down. She turned her head and looked at Chu Luchen angrily. Her other hand went to hold Chu Luchen's big hand. Seeing Qin Wanru's tight little face and her beautiful eyes were enshrouded with tears, Chu Luchen was stunned for a moment and immediately understood. His hand slightly loosened, but he still didn't let go. He pulled her hand again and moved his head closer. Has your father liked this bride for a long time? What? Qin Wanru's hand still felt painful. Because of the pain, she was also bold and said angrily. I just want to ask. I feel strange. Chu Luchen turned his head and his voice became lower and lower. His handsome and flawless face was too close to her, which made Qin Wanru feel very uncomfortable. She reached out her other hand and pushed his pale handsome face, indicating him to stay away from her. Chu Luchen ignored her and reached out to grab her other hand. Both of her hands were held in his big hand. Qin Wanru struggled twice but failed. She didn't dare to move violently again. What's strange? Qin Wanru pursed her mouth and said. I just feel strange. It shouldn't be like this. Chu Luchen turned his head and looked at Qin Wanru's pink little face. He increasingly felt that her complexion was better. Her eyes could be so dark, with the mist that had not dissipated just now. Her lips could be so delicate and bright, which was completely different from his pale face. He liked this color very much. It would be great if he also had such a bright color. On that pair of jet black eyes, there were long and curly eyelashes like brushes. He stretched out his hand and pressed it in front of her eyes. Sure enough, He felt the soft feeling of the eyelashes brushing against his palm. This little girl's eyelashes were really long. He raised his hand and touched Qin Wanru's beautiful hair. Chu Luchen felt so comfortable that his eyes almost narrowed. Sure enough, it felt the same as touching his cat. It was very comfortable. It was also as beautiful as the mutated cat he had raised. What are you doing? Qin Wanru didn't know when he covered her eyes with his hands and touched her head. She struggled with her hands and tried to widen her watery eyes. She stared at Chu Luchen fiercely to express her anger. However, the anger expressed by her beautiful eyes was not deterrent at all. Chu Luchen felt that it was the same as his cat's eyes. It was the kind of feeling that she was very angry but couldn't do anything to him. Chapter 84. Chu Luchen reached out his hand and pressed her long hair. Looking at her big wet eyes looking up at him, he felt that they were more and more alike. It had been a while since he left the capital city, and he missed his cat very much. No wonder the angry little girl in front of him also looked like her. His light-colored lips slowly curled up, and his eyes and eyebrows curved into crescents as he smiled. Qin Wanru opened her eyes wide in surprise. She felt that she had seen a ghost. She felt that Prince Chen's smile was warm. This gloomy, black-bellied, and temperamental sick and arrogant prince made her feel warm at this moment. She felt that she must have been dazzled. She closed her eyes and opened them again. At this time, the sound inside had stopped. She heard Qin Huaiyong leaving, and then the heavy footsteps went away. It was quiet in her ears. "Your Highness, can we go now?" Qin Wanru said, reaching out and moving her hand which was held tightly. The vat was quite big, and in fact, they did not need to be so close to each other. This made her very uncomfortable. "Don't worry, it's good here," Chu Luchen said lazily. He leaned against the wall of the vat behind him and looked up at the sky. It was noon, and the sun was a little warm. There was no wind, so it was a good place to bask in the sun. Qin Wanru also raised her head and squinted at the sky. "What's there to look at?" "It's better to look at the stars at night." "Hiding in the vat at night to look at the stars?" Chu Luchen smiled and raised his eyebrows. He thought it was a good idea. When he went back to his palace, he could also put a big vat outside. At night, he could hide in it and look at the stars. Such a big starry sky did not look as lonely as seeing the whole sky. "Have you tried it?" "I haven't." Qin Wanru blushed and said stubbornly. She really had tried it, not only tried it, but also tried it several times. After her rebirth, she couldn't sleep at night. She would sneak out alone and hide in the big vat in the yard. She felt very safe there. When she looked up, the starry sky was above her head. She curled up at the bottom of the vat and felt very safe. It also made her really realize that she had been reborn. She was a complete person and was not cut in half at the waist. "The next time you come to this king's palace, this king will prepare a large vat for you. You can move it to the roof to look at the stars, it will look more beautiful," Chu Luchen said with the complacency and tiredness of a teenager. At the top of the high palace hall, there was a huge fish tank beside the sharp horn of the beast. There was a head sticking out of the fish tank, looking up at the starry sky, and the solemn background of the palace hall. Qin Wanru felt that she could not think about it anymore. That scene was so beautiful and soul-stirring that she could not bear it. If this was discovered by others, what would the rumors be like? The future emperor of a country actually liked to hide in a vat in the middle of the night. This hobby would definitely make this future emperor who succeeded in seizing the throne embark on a strange path. It was a little hard to imagine, but looking at Chu Luchen's serious eyes, Qin Wanru still lowered her head to hide the smile in her eyes. "Thank you, Prince," Qin Wanru said sensibly, no matter whether she had the chance to see it or not. "Has your father always been interested in the bride in the vat and deliberately made such a scene?" Chu Luchen touched his smooth chin thoughtfully and continued the previous topic. Don't talk nonsense. Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat and she suddenly raised her head. Nonsense? Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows and showed a trace of a smile on his face. Between his raised eyebrows and eyes, there was a chill in his bones. You are so bold that you dare to say that I am talking nonsense. I dare not. Qin Wanru's face turned pale, and she hurriedly lowered her head and said sensibly. Probably because she was in the vat, she forgot for a moment that he also had the attribute of coldness and blackness. The bride in the vat is your father's cousin. Chu Luchen did not intend to pursue her crime, and a trace of dim light flashed in his eyes. At this time, he was more like the high and mighty crown prince that Qin Wanru saw at the last time, powerful, cold and ruthless, instead of the handsome young man with a bit of sickness and arrogance just now. She is my father's cousin. My Aunt Shui grew up in our mansion, and it was my grandmother who raised her. After she got married, she didn't have a child, so my grandmother brought her here. After that, she lived quietly in a corner of the backyard. If Madame didn't plot against her, she would still be my Aunt Shui. Qin Wanru explained. She had to explain, for fear that Chu Luchen would have a slight misunderstanding about Shui Rulan, which would be disadvantageous to her in the future. Didn't your father do anything before? Chu Luchen smiled with satisfaction, with a little bit of laziness. No, my father seldom saw Aunt Shui before, and he was very polite. Although we grew up together, there was no love affair between us. Qin Wanru said carefully, and her snow-white face was full of seriousness. But the madam of the general's mansion helped them, and it seems that Ningyuan army general will benefit from it in the end. Chu Luchen said casually. His words made Qin Wanru's heart beat wildly twice, as if something was about to break out of the ground, but she immediately held it down. Your Highness, you must be joking. Your Highness, can we leave now? If someone finds out that you are with me, it is not good, is it? Moreover, you are wearing servant's clothes. Qin Wanru persuaded again, because she didn't want to be crowded here with Chu Luchen. What? Are you afraid that people will see you with a servant? Chu Luchen loosened his hand, let go of Qin Wanru's hand, pulled his clothes, and said quite complacently. Her hand was loosened, and Qin Wanru looked at her wrist which was pinched red, and was quite speechless. Didn't you just say that you will take me to a fun place? You said that it is something I have not played before. Then take me there. Chu Luchen seemed to want to stand up, with a reluctant look, then I will go with you to have a look. Qin Wanru reached out to hold Chu Luchen. She just wanted to coax Chu Luchen to go to the back window to have a look at the bridal chamber. How could there be a fun place he had not played before? She rolled her watery eyes. Child, have you played in the vat before? No. Chu Luchen shook his head, and looked at Qin Wanru in the vat with disgust. Everything he did was in accordance with the rules, how could he do such an unruly thing? Since you have not, then it is naturally considered that you have not played before, right? Qin Wanru smiled proudly, and slightly raised her cherry lips, with a bit of childishness and pride. Chu Luchen laughed in a low voice, and his appearance was peerless. You don't mean to say that the place you will take me to play is this vat, do you? This. Child, don't you think it is fun? Qin Wanru murmured. Qin Wanru, you are very smart, very good, much smarter than my cat. Chu Luchen said with a smile, which was quite meaningful. But this praise shocked Qin Wanru, and her back was slightly sweating. She vigilantly looked at the beautiful young man with clear eyes, who looked harmless to both humans and beasts. Child, can't it be counted? Yes, yes, I will let you go. Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows in a good mood, and then he stood up and jumped out of the vat. Seeing that he finally went out, Qin Wanru was relieved, and reached out to the edge of the vat. Although the edge of the vat was very high for her, she still reached out and jumped out of the vat with ease. Seeing that they came out, Xiao Xuanzi and Qing Yu also jumped out of the vat. They went out from the back door together. Child, are you tired? Do you want to go back and have a rest? When they went out to a secluded place, Qin Wanru stood still and looked at Chu Liuchen's face, and it seemed that he looked worse than before. Master, you have to go back and take medicine. You can't stay here anymore. Hearing what she said, Xiao Xuanzi was shocked. He came up and saw that his master's face was weak, and his lips were almost snow-white, so he reached out to help him. Go back. Chu Liuchen was rarely easy to talk to, and he nodded. Qin Wanru, send me to the back door of your mansion. So his carriage is parked at the back door? Qin Wanru thought helplessly, but looking at his face, she knew that he might really be unable to hold on. She did not dare to hesitate, and led them to take a detour to the back door. The back door was unlocked, and the old maid who guarded the back door might be busy with the servants because there were many things to do in the mansion today, so she was not here. Pushing open the unlocked back door, they saw a wide carriage parked outside. It looked ordinary, but it was too wide. The curtain were hanging on it, and the dark patterns embroidered on them were actually real gold thread embroidery. If one did not look carefully, he would not be able to see it, and would think that it was dyed. It was low-key but luxurious. Xiao Xuanzi helped Chu Liuchen to get on the carriage. Seeing Chu Liuchen's weak look, Qin Wanru reached out to help him get on the carriage. When Chu Liuchen got on the carriage and saw the coachman skillfully turn the horse around and leave slowly and steadily, Qin Wanru breathed a sigh of relief. She was really afraid that the prince would have an accident in the mansion, which was a responsibility that no one could afford. When the carriage disappeared, she and Qing Yu went back to the mansion and closed the door from the inside. The carriage moved slowly, and Chu Liuchen, who was leaning on the couch, reached out to take a bowl of thick black medicine from Xiao Xuanzi. He took it up and drank it, and then put it down, and reached out to rub between his eyebrows. Master, are you very tired? Xiao Xuanzi took the bowl, looked at his master's face carefully, and asked. Chu Liuchen closed his eyes and said, yes, in a low voice. Master, we will go to see the master of Jingxin Monastery later, and I think it is a little effective. In the past, if you don't have a rest for such a long time, you may feel uncomfortable. What do you think, master? Xiao Xuanzi cautiously asked about his feeling after taking the medicine. What's the use? It is just a temporary effect. Chu Liuchen closed his eyes, and his jade-like face was calm, as if he was talking about someone else's body, and he did not care about it at all. Master, even if it is only a temporary effect, we have to try. Maybe we can really find the person that Dr. Qi said, and then your disease can be cured. Xiao Xuanzi said. This time, Chu Liuchen did not even make a sound, and waved his hand, directly signaling him to shut up. Xiao Xuanzi hesitated, but still could not help but say, Master, do you mean to go to Jingxin Monastery? Go. A very casual voice. Chapter 85. The wedding banquet went smoothly. Even Madame D, who everyone thought would definitely make trouble this time, did not make any trouble. However, she was nowhere to be seen. It was said that she was sick. Of course, not many people believed the so-called sick. Some well-informed people said that she was not sick but grounded. Qin Wanru and old grandma went to Jingxin Monastery again after Shui Rulan recognized her. Old grandma still needed to have a good rest, so Qin Wanru volunteered to serve her. Everything in the mansion would be managed by Shui Rulan in the future. There were not many coachmen in the mansion. This time, almost all of them got into trouble, so they were replaced. When Qin Wanru went up the mountain, she brought more servant girls with her. Qing Yu still accompanied her, and there was also the newly recruited second-class servant girl Chu Lu and 2 other little servant girls. The number of servants was much more than last time. When they arrived at Jingxin Monastery, they still lived in the fragrant room that they lived in last time. Originally, they only planned to go down the mountain to preside over the wedding of General's mansion. Old Grandma and Qin Wanru left many things in Jingshin Monastery. This time, they didn't need to spend much effort to move more luggage. In the next half-month, Qin Wanru lived on the mountain comfortably. Old Grandma's health was getting better day by day, and Qin Wanru's medical skills were also improving by leaps and bounds. With the foundation of the last life, she could almost learn medicine at a rapid speed. Her acupuncture skills were also very fast, which made Mingqiu Nun more and more exclaim that she had accepted the right disciple. She was indeed a good seedling to learn medicine. Moreover, she was very interested in medical skills. When there were people who went up the mountain to seek medical treatment from the master of Jingshin Monastery, Qin Wanru also listened to the master of Jingshin Monastery treat them in the room beside. Miss Chu Lu secretly went to see someone again. Under the lamp, Qin Wanru was seriously reading a medical book. Qin Yu came in and reported in a low voice. How many times has it been? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the shadow of the lamp in front of her and asked. Qin Yu understood and said, it has been the third time. I have hinted to her several times under the instruction of Mississippi, since that's the case, bring him over. A trace of coldness flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. Even Madame D did not expect the appearance of Chu Lu, so she tried to take Chu Lu away from her several times. However, Madame D could not protect herself now, so it was difficult for her to take care of Chu Lu. Qin Yu nodded and soon brought Chu Lu over. As soon as Chu Lu entered the door, she knelt down in front of Qin Wanru. Second miss, I just miss my mother. I didn't do anything wrong. Then she burst into tears. I didn't do anything else. Please forgive me, Second Mississippi, Chu Lu. I told you last time that once you entered the general's mansion, you are a member of the general's mansion. You bought your body to enter the general's mansion, so from now on, you are no longer related to the past. Even if you want to see her, you have to report to the young mistress and get her permission before you can see her. But you secretly go to see her again and again. Have you ever put the young mistress in your eyes? Qin Yu scolded her harshly. Of course I listened to you wholeheartedly, but my mother was sick. My father knew that I was in Jingshin Monastery and specially came up the mountain to tell me about my mother's condition. Other than that, I didn't do anything else. Chu Lu was unconvinced and tried to defend herself. She reached out to wipe her tears, looking extremely wronged. Not only did she feel wronged, but she was also a little angry. She felt that Qin Wanru was a little unreasonable. Your mother was sick, but your father didn't go to the general's mansion to find her, but came to Jingshin Monastery? Your father is really resourceful. Qin Wanru reached out to pick up the teacup beside her, and took a sip of tea foam. Chu Lu looked a little flustered. She did not expect that Qin Wanru would suddenly jump out of the original topic and ask such a question. But maybe it was someone in the mansion who told my father. You just entered the general's mansion, so you don't know many people. Only people in your garden know you. When I left, I specifically told Nanny Yu not to spread the news that you followed me to Jingshin Monastery, so how did your father know about you? Qin Wanru's eyes flashed a trace of darkness, and her eyes fell on Chu Lu with indescribable majesty and fierceness. I don't know. I heard that your father found you on the second day after you went up the mountain. It's so fast. If no one told him, he couldn't have found you. Chu Lu, tell me what your father wants you to do and who asked him to find you. Qin Wanru asked with a cold look. Chu Lu looked at Qin Wanru. A pair of childish little face was tight, and the coldness in her eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. Chu Li's eyes moved, and she dared not to look at Qin Wanru's eyes again. She stuttered and explained, I don't know, but maybe it was a coincidence. My mother was sick, and my father came to Jingshin Monastery to fulfill the vow for my mother, so we happened to meet. Fulfill the vow for your mother? Qin Wanru sneered, and the teacup in her hand fell heavily on the table, and the table shook twice, making a sharp and ear-piercing sound. Chu Lu, do you think that I'm still young and ignorant, so I'm easy to fool? Chu Lu, you're now a member of the general's mansion, and if I'm not satisfied with you, I have every reason to sell you. Now, it's my mother who is in charge of the mansion, not madam. Don't you know that? Qin Wanru's voice was not loud, with the naivety of a girl of her age, but it fell on Chu Li's ears with a sense of coldness, and Chu Li's legs became weak, and she knelt on the ground. Qing Yu, find old Maidya to sell her tomorrow, and sell her far away. I don't want to see her in Jiangzhou at all. Qin Wanru ordered coldly. With Qin Wanru's words, it meant that no one in Jiangzhou prefecture would buy Chu Lu, and Chu Lu and her parents would never see each other again. Yes, miss, I'll ask someone to go down the mountain to find old Maidya tomorrow. Qin Yu nodded, and looked at Chu Lu with contempt, without any intention to protect Chu Lu. Second miss, I'll tell you everything, please forgive me. Second Mississippi, hearing that Qin Wanru was serious this time, Chu Lu really panicked this time, and reached out to hug Qin Wanru's leg, but was pushed away by Qing Yu, and the other two servant girls came over to pull her down. Chu Lu struggled desperately, Miss, what do you want to know? I'll tell you everything, please let me go. Qin Wanru seemed not to hear her words, or maybe she didn't care about her words at all, and picked up the medical book on the table to read, as if she didn't care about what Chu Lu said at all. Miss, my father got the news from Madame D, miss, it's really Madame D. Chu Lu originally wanted to pretend, but seeing that Qin Wanru didn't care at all, she anxiously hugged the door frame and shouted, not daring to hide anything. Pull her back. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows coldly, and her eyes fell on Chu Lu calmly again. Looking at Qin Wanru who was so calm, Chu Lu didn't dare to hide anything. Miss, it's really Madame D who asked my father to come, my mother is really sick, madam. Madame D asked someone to send money to my father, and told him that I'm in Jingshin Monastery, and also asked you to stare at me. Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and her eyes became colder. Yes. Chu Lu was so scared just now, and when she heard Qin Wanru's question, she immediately lowered her head and admitted it. Asked you to stare at me for what? Qin Wanru slightly raised her eyebrows, and asked calmly. That is, if there's anything wrong, you must tell my father early, and then let my father pass it on to Madame D. What did you find in the past few times? Your father came to see you again and again? Qin Wanru asked. I didn't find anything, and I just wanted to ask about my mother's health, so I asked my father to go up the mountain several times when he was free. Miss, please believe me, I really didn't say anything. Every time when my father went to report, Madam didn't say anything. Chu Lu shook her head in panic, and she really didn't find anything. In addition to serving old grandma, Qin Wanru went to the master of Jingshin Monastery to meditate. Every time you asked your father to come, your father went to report to Madam? Qin Wanru asked. Yes, every time my father saw me, he must go to see Madam. This was originally Madam's order, and Madam paid money to cure my mother. Chu Li's voice became lower and lower, and her head followed. Qin Wanru frowned, and she knew that Chu Lu wouldn't find out anything, but why did Madame D pay so much attention to it? There was a very strange feeling, and she couldn't figure out Madame D's intention at the moment. She and Madame D were already standing on the opposite side, and both father and grandmother already knew about this. If Madame D wanted to deal with her in the future, it was really worthless to only rely on the hearsay of some servant girls. But she just did this thing seriously, and Qing Shui in the mansion didn't do anything unusual, but Chu Lu, who was originally not suspicious, just kept getting into trouble, and it was really inexplicable. From the information that she inquired before, she also knew that Chu Li's appearance was an accident, and it was an accident that even Qin Yuru and Madame D didn't expect. Now Madame D was crazy about Chu Lu, Did it mean that she really wanted to get information about her from Chu Lu? A second-class servant girl who just entered the mansion was no different from an ordinary servant girl. How could she know anything valuable? Or it was not only Chu Lu, but also Chu Li's family. She faintly felt that this matter must be related to her. Madame D wouldn't be so free, so there must be something important, and it was something that Madame D had to pay attention to. Even if Madame D was now grounded, this matter couldn't be delayed. When will your father go up the mountain next time? Qin Wanru asked coldly, and her eyes became deep where no one could see. Maybe she should think differently, and this matter should not be related to Chu Lu, but Chu Li's family. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.